started
All right.
maybe a month ago? A month or 2 months ago?
Man, I don't know, we hit Christmas, so that threw everything off, you know?
We started this.
I don't know where I am.
With trauma and looking at neurodiversity, and it was just awesome. So we're welcoming Jesse back to continue the conversation with us, so we can continue to learn how to just jump into trauma and what that means. So I'm excited to have you back with us, Jesse.
Thanks for having me back. This is great. Yay!
All right.
How many were here for the first one? Yeah? Quite a few. Okay, cool. So we'll do like a little review, because there was a part 1, but it was like a month ago, or whatever it was. So we'll start. What's that?
December 7th.
December 7th. Oh, it's a little over a month, right?
Was part 1 recorded?
Part 1 was recorded. There was a little bit of microphone issues, but I think we got like 95% of it. So, but that's somewhere, right? Can they access that?
So we can resend it out. So everybody who is here today will also get it via email.
Sounds great.
Yes.
Or the PowerPoint too.
Yeah, with the PowerPoint, right? And same thing will be for this as well. So let's do a little bit of a recap. What we're talking about today is neurodiversity and trauma. There's a lot of understanding about the way that trauma impacts those individuals who are struggling with housing and struggling to make their way in the world, and the ways that trauma affects their brain and their ability to access and utilize services. But on top of that, neurodiversity, those people, ADHD, autism spectrum, gifted, high IQ even, have different ways of experiencing the world, and therefore also different ways of responding and reacting to trauma. And so some of the ways that we typically work with trauma will have to be adapted and worked in a different way to help them in a way that fits with their experience of the world. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. This part 2 is much more of the practical piece. This is like, how are we actually going to do this thing? The very first part was about what is trauma and what is neurodiversity. So we'll do a little recap. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to start there. I guess first you should know who I am. My name's Jesse Lyon. I own Lyon Counseling. We've got 2 locations, one in Winter Park and one on West Colonial, with a bunch of offices. And Sarah is here, one of the therapists who works with us. We got a whole team of therapists, and we do wonderful work. We don't work with Medicaid or Medicare, but we do a lot of sliding scale, because what we have done is work with the local universities who are putting out new counselors and educating them. And so part of their training, part of their schooling, is they have to provide service hours to those in need. And so those service hours, because it's part of their education, it's required for their degree, are very low price, very low sliding scale. So that's something that we try and connect with the community who might need that support. I've also done a lot of other things outside of counseling. I think a lot of people, very cringily, but it's great, looked me up on TikTok. I do a lot of social media work, and I do a lot of speaking. You can find me on the internet, Lyon Mental Health. So same as my last name and my counseling company, but mental health on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. And that's been really cool for me, honestly. I think one of the things I'm really passionate about and why I'm here today is we have to make these services and we have to make this therapy accessible for others. And so if we're not showing up in the spaces that people already are, how are they going to communicate with us? How are they going to access these services? How are we going to reach them in a way that fits with their life experience? And so I kind of felt like, as a counselor, it's my responsibility to be able to utilize social media, which is the language and the place that people are looking for things, and speak on those platforms well. And so that's been a huge passion of mine. And honestly, I've found a real great outlet. Like through COVID, I was making videos, and it was a creative release for me while all of us were losing our minds in lockdown. But that's a little bit about me. We can go to the next one. Okay. As we talk about this, right, my definition of trauma is a little bit different than I think most people. And one of the things that honestly frustrates me a lot is when you talk to other counselors, they can really struggle to define what trauma is. And when they try and define trauma, they usually resort to symptoms. Well, it's this symptom and this symptom and this symptom. For our purposes today, if you have somebody who is experiencing the world differently, and maybe behaves differently than your neurotypical or average person, those symptoms may not really identify them accurately. And so if we're relying on symptomology to identify people who have trauma and need help, but they respond differently, we might miss people. And we might try and help them in ways that actually aren't going to be helpful for them, and try and give them services that they may not even be able to fully utilize because they're experiencing the world differently. So we have to have, I'm a deep thinker, I'm a philosophical thinker. I need to know why I'm doing something, otherwise I don't want to do it. I don't know, maybe you all are kind of like that too. It's like you could tell me what to do, but unless I know why I'm doing it, I ain't gonna get it done. I need to have the meaning, the motivation behind it, right? And so that's important for trauma. So when we're talking about trauma for today, and take this with you if this is helpful, the way we define it is trauma is the non-consensual ripping away of one's identity. And so think about that, right? Let's make that practical for a moment. Let's say something like a car accident, right? I go about my life, and I have these experiences. I have this environment that I'm a part of. And I start to develop an idea of who I am based on those experiences in that environment. Well, sometimes in life, we have things that don't follow the pattern, right? Every day I drive to work. Every day I get there safely, sometimes on time, sometimes not on time. But it's 99.99% of the time I make it there, right? I just drive. Well, that starts to become a part of my identity. I just hop in my car. I don't even think about it at a certain point. I mean, how many of you, we're tired in the morning, we turn the car on, throw it in reverse, back out of the driveway without realizing all the different steps that we did. When you're 16 years old and thinking about, oh no, wait, all these things, it's a lot of conscious effort, but these things become integrated into who we are. We don't have to think about them anymore because we've learned them. They become routine, flow state, right? Until it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. And we get into a car accident. So I develop this identity about myself. I can drive safely to work, right? My life is safe. My life is routine. My life is normal. And then one day it's not. It's easy to forget some of the reality of the world that we live in when we develop these routines and identities about ourselves that maybe aren't 100% accurate. And so in this situation, I have this identity, I'm safe. I live in this world, we've got traffic lights and stop signs, and I'm expecting everyone to follow those until they don't. And then I am left with, well, maybe I'm not safe. Now my brain is in reaction formation, right? It's like, oh, I've got to come up with a new identity and a new understanding of myself and the world because the way that I thought about things doesn't fit anymore. And you can think about that from something like a car accident all the way down to sexual trauma, physical trauma, cultural trauma, religious trauma, whatever it is. And so these identities become torn away, and then we're left not knowing quite who we are. And in this space, the brain just tries to make sense. And sometimes it makes sense in ways, that aren't 100% accurate. And you see this, right? When the brain is presented with the opportunity of chaos, the brain would much rather try and take control than accept that the world is chaotic and dangerous. I want to stay the same, right? I drive to work safely each and every day. I want that to continue to be my reality. And so a lot of times with this trauma, when an identity is ripped away, I'll start to blame myself for those things. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe I was going too fast, right? And maybe that's true, but think about it in a different context. Maybe when we have somebody who's experienced sexual trauma, right? The brain starts to think, maybe I should have parked in a more well-lit area. Maybe I shouldn't have been wearing that outfit, right? And those things just aren't true. Those things aren't, that's not the reality. It doesn't matter what you were wearing or who you were with or what you did. It doesn't give anybody the right to do these things. It doesn't give anybody the right to take that identity away from you. But the brain doesn't know what to do with it because it did, right? I was violated, whether it was my car or my body or my physical piece. And so the brain is saying, it's hard to accept that reality of chaos and unsafety. It's much easier to blame myself and try and maintain my theory that the world is a safe place to live. So I'd rather blame myself and accept the truth of chaos. That affects people. I mean, I can even see in the room, like it affects me while I'm talking about it, it affects you while I'm listening to it. Everybody's going to respond to that in different ways. And for those who maybe already don't feel like they fit into the world because they think differently, they're going to respond to it in maybe even more exaggerated in different ways. And it's our responsibility to be patient, to slow down, to listen to them and to hear their story and think, okay, who are you and how can I help? And so hopefully through today's presentation, we can talk about really understanding where these individuals are coming from and how some of these experiences affect their lives. But we got to start with a good understanding of trauma. So that's, the tagline, trauma-focused hypnotherapy. I have a school. So in the state of Florida, in order to be a hypnotherapist in the medical profession, you have to complete a 50-hour course. You have to receive training to do that. So me and my business partner, Zach Dodson, we run a school called Trauma-Focused Hypnotherapy that satisfies those requirements for the state and for the Department of Health. So that way therapists can use hypnosis to treat specifically complex trauma. And so this is the foundation of our course, is this phrase. As we teach therapists how to treat this trauma, we have to have this strong foundation of what are we talking about when we say the word trauma. So I think we can go to the next slide.
So when you say hypnotic, I think of when I'm, go to shows or whatever, and they have a person act like a dog, or,
Sure.
That's the thing that flashes through my brain, so you're gonna give a little more clarity on that.
Yeah, if you could actually, as we go through, write down these questions, because these are great. We're going to have a little bit of a break at 10:30, and so maybe about 10:15 I'll stop. We'll have a little halfway segment to ask questions, because that's a great one. I get that one all the time.
Yeah.
You were asking, just because the microphone's on me, not you, I'll repeat it. You were asking about hypnosis and saying, well, is it like, you going to pull out a pocket watch? Am I going to squawk like a chicken or bark like a dog? I mean, if you want to. Yeah, sure. We could do that. You could do that. You let me know, okay? We'll schedule you a session. Okay, all right, great. So we got trauma, but now we got to do the other half of this presentation, right? What is neurodivergence? Okay, that's a big one. Depends on who you ask, but really, for our purposes, let's think about it this way. You've got we'll call them normie, or normal, and I use a lot of air quotes with that because, what is it? Okay, neurodivergence is somebody whose brain functions and thinks differently than what we typically consider normal, right, in the psychology field. And we're growing a lot in that. A lot of things have transitioned to spectrums, right? We understand it's not just you're autistic, you're ADHD. It's like, well, there's some variance, there's some rainbow in that, in all of these. And so we really are making some great progress that I'm excited about. But for today, let's talk about a few of these key ones, right? Stereotypically, neurodivergence is really autism, ADHD, giftedness. That's usually what they talk about. I'm adding a few ones in there because I think we need to pay attention to it. Bipolar and OCD are some different ways of the brain functioning, and those are kind of baked in. Those are born that way, right? Sense perceptions and learning disabilities. People can't help that kind of stuff. They're born that way. This is the way their brain works, and so it's up to us to understand these things. Dissociative disorders, like multiple personalities, which is called DID, or schizophrenia. It's different ways of the brain's working. And so we'll go over a little bit real quick. Autism, I think the best way to kind of think about it for today, it's very nuanced, but difference in social norms. Normies have a way of socially interacting. Well, that's not the way somebody on the autism spectrum interacts, right? That doesn't mean it's better or worse, it just means it's different. In fact, there's a lot of great research studies that show when you put two normies together and have them work together, there's like X level of efficiency, right? If you put someone who's on the autism spectrum with somebody who is neurotypical, they struggle to connect. They struggle to understand each other because their brains and their social norms are different. But when you put someone with autism spectrum with somebody on autism spectrum, the same team, they're actually much more efficient than normies. So it's not that it's really a disability. It's just that it thinks different. And when they're allowed to function the way that they naturally function and with somebody who gets them, you can't stop them. A lot of them can be like high-level CEOs, inventors, and stuff like this. They're able to think differently. So social norms, a lot of the social norms that we take for granted don't apply and don't make sense. And to be honest, a lot of our social norms don't make sense. So I can't fault them for that. ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. When we're talking about ADHD, the thing I want you to pay attention to is we're really understanding those with ADHD it's more than just concentration. Those who have ADHD struggle to regulate their dopamine well. And so dopamine is the chemical inside of our brain. I think we all know it as the happy chemical, right? It makes us happy, right? But what it also does is it rewards completion of tasks. So if we were to have an individual and just totally take away their dopamine in their brain, they actually wouldn't just get sad. They would be paralyzed, which a lot of people don't realize. If you take away somebody's dopamine, they're paralyzed because there's no motivation to even move. Everything that you're doing, right? You know, bringing your bottle of water up to your lips, having a snack, writing on that piece of paper and completing that sentence, all is little bits of dopamine reward. And so somebody who has ADHD, their brain doesn't regulate that dopamine reward in a consistent or predictable fashion. And so they may struggle to get tasks done. They may struggle to complete things on time. They may struggle and be blamed and labeled as lazy, when really they're not. They're struggling inside of their heads. And so you can think, as we go through these, trauma is going to affect each one of these different than what maybe your normal picture is going to be. Right? A lot of people with ADHD, in order to become successful, in order to cope, will actually motivate themselves through fear. And so that's why you'll see someone with ADHD, instead of like, you know, they'll go to a therapist and be like, well, you know, complete your homework, it'll make you feel good. You know, clean up your room, it'll make you feel good. Not for ADHD. No, it won't. The only way that they can really overcome and complete those tasks is by motivating themselves through fear. And so it's like, well, the deadline's tomorrow. Okay, I guess I better start now. And so that's how we do it. We're going to do questions at the end, if that's okay.
Not a question. It's an addition about the ADHD.
I would love it. Just write it down. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. And so dopamine regulation. I want you to think about that as we talk this through. Bipolar and OCD, I want you to think about some of those things, how difficult it may be, especially as we're talking about identity, how difficult it may be when every morning you wake up, you don't know how your emotions are going to feel. And so if I'm sort of vacillating between mania and depression and I don't know where my emotions are going to be, most of us take for granted that I'm going to wake up and feel like Jesse, or feel like you, or feel like whoever. But when your brain struggles with some of this emotional regulation, you never know who you're going to wake up feeling like. There's like many different versions of yourself, and there's kind of an inherent, like almost trauma with yourself of, I don't know who my identity is going to be when I wake up tomorrow. That's a little scary. And so it makes it tough when you're like planning for the future and like, well, this is what I want to do. And like, I'm trying to start my own business and I'm trying to, you know, even simple things like I'm trying to sign my lease tomorrow, right? I hope so. I hope I wake up as the kind of person who can get that done tomorrow. It makes it very difficult to plan, and it starts to create almost a hatred for yourself because there's no real consistency. Imagine if you had a friend that you didn't feel like you could trust to show up for you when you really needed it. Now imagine that friend is yourself. It's hard. It's really hard, and we have to be sensitive and understand how that may be affecting someone. Giftedness and high IQ is another great one. A lot of people think this is a gift, right? I mean, it's even in the name. A lot of people think this is an asset. Sure, it might be, but there's an intense feeling of loneliness when nobody can connect with you. Nobody thinks the same way. There's a real difficulty feeling motivation and getting things done when everybody else is thinking this way and are trying to accomplish these tasks, but you're bored, right? People start to label you as lazy. People start to label you as a loner. It's hard. Disassociative. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense too. I'm not even sometimes fully feeling grounded in this reality. That's hard. Sense and learning disability. It's easy for someone to say, hey, here's your lease, right? Here's, go sign up for a bank account, right? Go get your ID done, get your fingerprints figured out so you can have these things and move on to the next step. Well, sure, but what if reading, all the words are backwards when I try and read them? Exactly. What if my ability to process information is not what everybody else assumes it's going to be? You know, I may be labeled as unintelligent or dumb. When I'm not, my intelligence is great, but I just don't have the ability to literally to see words on a page the way that everybody else does. That's tough. That's tough. So I want you to think about some of these things and think about how each individual person's experience may be very, very different. and how that's going to affect them. We can go on to the next one. I like it. I like exaggerated statements. Stop helping. So I'll give a little story. We are currently in the preparation for summer semester when it comes to school. So I've gotten a lot of applications for interns who want to apply for the practice and want to be therapists and start their education, right? So I always ask them this question. I'm like, what's your motivation to be a counselor? And it's one of the #1 burnout professions in the world, right? It's a pretty thankless job oftentimes. It's very lonely and isolating. Why do you want to do it? What's your motivation here? And so, well, what do you think they all tell me? I like helping people. And I tell them right away, that's a terrible answer. I'll try again. And they're like, I'm bombing this interview. I'm like, maybe, I don't know, we'll see what you say next. And so I tell them, you know, sometimes nicely, sometimes abruptly, but I tell them, like, let me give you something here. If my motivation is to help somebody, and this goes for all of us, if my motivation is to help somebody, isn't that kind of inherently codependent? Right? If my motivation at the end of the day is I get a reward for seeing somebody be helped, if I have nobody to help, or if the person I'm trying to help doesn't get any better, what's that going to do to me? Ooh. And I see a lot of therapists get burnt out for that very reason. And worse, become resentful and combative with their clients because they didn't do their homework. They're not listening to me. No, you're a bad therapist. Right? We got to take some responsibility. We're the professionals in the room, right? We're the ones who are running these organizations and trying to reach these people. We can't start to blame those people that we're trying to help. We need to think, okay, what's going on here? And so I tell them, like, my motivation for being a counselor, and I think something that's much more solid and something, and this is important to me, maybe I'm revealing a little bit of my past trauma. Something that's important to me is I want a motivation that nobody can take away from me. Something that nobody can steal from me. That's important. And so I say one thing that nobody can take away from me is my curiosity. And so every day that I get the opportunity to sit in my therapy office and listen to someone's authentic story and just sit in that and imagine what it must be like to live in their shoes is a day that I learn even more what it means to be a human being. And that teaches me something about myself. And because I'm sitting in that space of holding space for them and creativity and being excited and curious about what their experience is like, there's an authentic, unconditional, positive regard for that client. And it's through that, we know this from research, unconditional positive regard is the #1 change agent in therapy. And so when you can sit in that space, they get better. But it's a byproduct. My primary motivation is curiosity. That teaches me what it means to be a person. So, little tongue-in-cheek, of course we're going to help people, right? That's what we're all here for to do today. But I want to keep in mind what our primary goal is. Our primary goal is curiosity. Curiosity and exploring. And from that space, we're going to have such a more stable and solid foundation to impact those who are around us. I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. Okay, let's go to the next one. Where am I at next? Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of foundation laid, oh, we're good on time. Okay, got it. Now that we've got a little bit of a foundation laid, let's talk about providing care. From some of these core tenets, we talked about what is trauma, what is neurodiversity, and what is our mission here? What are we trying to accomplish? Now we can talk about what providing care is. All right, we can go next one. These are the 3 things I think are important as we go through the process of providing care. 1, we got to identify, right? Identify the trauma, identify the individual, identify what they're going through. We got to do some information gathering. And any good doctor does this, right? This is kind of cooked into our medical system, right? The first step is you fill out an intake form. You fill out some information, because if I start going prescribing we should do this, we should do that, this is what our next steps are, but I don't have a good foundation of who this individual is, I may be making assumptions that are totally incorrect. And if not downright dangerous and unhelpful, maybe making the problem worse. So identify. When life hands you the unexpected, what is the trauma that they've experienced? What is the reality that they live in? What is their history. And what does that mean for them, right? So it's like, okay, let me listen to this story first, right? I got to come in with open ears and open expectations. And that's hard in a lot of ways because the turnaround is so quick. We're listening to so many stories in a day. And then it's also difficult because I've got a story that I'm living in too. And so I've got to think about what are the assumptions that I'm making. So that's step one, identifying and gathering good information. Care. Then it's time for us to hold and help this person. Some people think differently, right? And if I usually care for someone in this way, I may need to use that information I've gathered to change the way that I'm helping them. Some people may need help in places that I didn't think they needed help. And some people, I may be trying to help them. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Me trying to help them, and then they get frustrated because they're like, you're micromanaging me. I'm like, oh, well, I thought you needed help there, but you got that one. And that thing that I thought you could do is the one that you're struggling with. Okay, let me pivot here. Let me pivot. And then empower. The whole goal of this situation, we know this, is not to create somebody who's dependent upon a system, who's dependent upon me, but is empowered to be their own care and change agent. That's what we're looking for. All right, we can go next one too. Okay. Nice. Let me catch up too. So let's start from that first piece. We got to create this identifying information, this baseline. There are three things when you're talking with a human being that I want you to pay attention to. Their thoughts, their emotions, and then their behaviors. In a lot of CBT, if anyone's familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, this is kind of what it's based on, right? Our thoughts influence our emotions influence our actions. And so cognitive behavioral therapy starts with cognitive, right? What is this person thinking? If I can pay attention to what they're thinking and what their system of thinking is, it'll make sense why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. It'll make sense why they're behaving the way that they're behaving, right? Because maybe there's two situations, right? Let's go back to the car accident sort of scenario. Maybe I get into a car and I feel confident, right? I'm driving to work. I don't even think about it, right? My thoughts are, I'm safe. I have the ability to manipulate this vehicle and take it to where I need to go. It's fine. But somebody who's had a car accident may be having a totally different set of thoughts that we're not aware of. They may be thinking, this is a dangerous place. Last time I was here, things did not go according to plan. And this sort of, this lie that I tell myself that I'm in control got taken away from me last time. I wasn't in control. Somebody else did something that totally changed my life in ways that I couldn't stop or prevent. So they may have a totally different set of emotions: fear, panic, trauma. And then what do you think they're going to do? Well, they're white knuckling the steering wheel. They're jabbing on the brake a lot faster than they really should, right? They may be accelerating too fast. They're a little twitchy, right? They're making quick movements. Well, that makes things even more dangerous, right? And so now, we've got a spiral going. I'm scared, I'm in danger, cars are not safe, I'm behaving in a certain way that is not the way that we should be operating a vehicle, so now it's even more unsafe, and I can tell that because my tires are screeching, I'm swerving, people are flipping me off as I go down the highway. You've seen them, we've all driven on I-4. And so it's like, now we're reinforcing our bad suggestions. And so our job is we gotta kind of pull them out of that. Okay, so if I'm just focusing on your behaviors, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And we know this from the unhoused population, those who are struggling with being successful and achieving the things that they want to achieve. Well, oftentimes we focus on, well, you need to do this first, we need to do this next, we need to do this next. But really, behaviors are the very last piece of the sequence. And so if we want to be more effective in the way that we're using the money that is collected and here to help support those, if we want to be more effective in speeding up that treatment time, we got to start with the thoughts first. Because otherwise, it's like treating the symptoms, but you never treat the virus, right? You go to the doctor, you want them to give you something for the flu, not just something to stop the congestion, right? Let's get rid of the flu. The congestion will fix itself. That's what it's all about. I say that too, Healthy thinking equals healthy living. And so I think I get really, when I say philosophical, it doesn't mean like I'm super smart or anything. It just means that like philosophy and good thinking sets a foundation for us to be more effective. And if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, how are we supposed to do it well? So behaviors. So these are the things I want to think about. Okay, thoughts. Especially when it comes to trauma. Let's think about this person. When we're listening to the story, what I'm listening for is how are their thoughts different than what would be healthy or maybe even what would be normal, right? Now here's the added piece. That's very normal for trauma therapy, identifying maladaptive thoughts. The added piece is, great, maybe that's part of trauma, but let's also think, how is this a part of their neurodiversity, their unique identity, and who they are as a human being? Let's talk about ADHD, right? Sure, ADHD thinks very quickly, right? And maybe because of trauma, we also know that very rapid thoughts and very paranoid thoughts happens because of trauma. So if somebody is thinking very quickly and jumping around from place to place, that could be a sign of trauma, but it could also be a sign of just ADHD. And so if I start treating trauma, instead of really assessing what is this person, how do they naturally think, I may miss and cross-wire things. And that's what we want to pay attention to. Altered thinking, concentration, and cognitive distortions. Emotions, right? If somebody has a chemical imbalance inside of them and they're kind of going back and forth between depression and mania as part of their bipolar, rapidly cycling emotions is a sign of trauma, but it could also be bipolar. It could also be a little bit of ADHD, right? We could also be missing something and expecting normal social cues, but they're having some exaggerated emotions because our normal social cues are not normal for their autism spectrum. And so we're seeing them act in a way that doesn't seem to fit the context, and we're thinking trauma, but it's like, well, maybe there's also something I'm missing here. Maybe there's a part of their experience that I'm assuming, which is not appropriate for me to assume. Then finally, behaviors, right? ADHD, fidgeting, knees bouncing. Yeah, fidgeting can be a sign of trauma, but it can also be a sign just this is the way the person is. So we're all kind of getting to a point here, and I think we can go to the next slide. This is all kind of coming to a point. We've got to stop and create a new baseline. When we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about neurodiversity, the first step in sort of correcting this downward spiral we talked about is, okay, who is this person? How do they function? I've got to create a good understanding of this individual as an individual to then be able to start to make changes. So what is this person's baseline? That's got to be the first step. Okay, we can go to the next one. Cool. All right. So let's think about this baseline. What are their thoughts? How are they thinking and how are they behaving? Well, how are they thinking first? Behavior's next. There's several things that we want to pay attention to with trauma when it comes to thoughts. Hypervigilance, right? Which is, I'm really paying attention to all the different things, right? And now let's think about that. If you're paying attention to all the different things that are going on around you and that hypervigilance, it's very tiring. And so we may start to notice people in the community that we're working with who seem lazy, and we may identify them as lazy at first. And so when we see that, I want to have this moment of stop and pause to think, okay, this person is not behaving in the way that I expected them to behave. Okay, before I just go assuming, let me think. Is this a part of a different way of them behaving, a different way of their brain thinking, right? ADHD, maybe their dopamine is off, right? Or is there a bipolar symptom going on here, right? They're waking up tired and depressed that day when the day before I saw them have a lot of energy and today they didn't. Before we go assuming trauma, let me think, okay, is this something that's changed inside of them chemically? It's tiring. And I talk about this a lot with my clients too. Like when we're thinking about thoughts and we're thinking about the ways that we want to interact with people, in therapy I get a lot of individuals, the most common things, anxiety, depression, right? And when people come to me and kind of ask why this is going on or what the treatment plan is, I say, well, first we got to make a distinction. I'm going to say this distinction with our thoughts too. We have to ask this trauma, depression, this anxiety, is this a chemical problem or is this an emotional problem? And this is the baseline I want to create as we think about how we're helping those that we're responsible to help with. Is this something that has developed over time because of an experience? Or is this just the way that your brain works? Is this a part of your baseline functioning, the way that your brain is wired? And those are going to be treated very differently. Because clients will come into me and they're like, oh, man, I'm really sad, I'm depressed. Does this mean I'm going to have to go get medication? Am I going to have to take antidepressants? I'm like, well, it depends. If this is a neurochemical problem, if this is a brain structure problem, yes, nothing that you do will create the serotonin that you're missing. That's just, your brain is not making enough of it. So we're going to have to treat that by, there's a great saying among therapists. It's like, if you can't make your own serotonin, store-bought's fine. And so it's like, yeah, okay, if you don't got enough of it, we got stuff for that. We treat these things, right? Now, if I start to treat that, though, by giving serotonin when there is an emotional experiential problem, think about what that does. Like, think about that for a minute. This is crazy. If I'm starting to treat something like depression by giving someone serotonin, but the actual problem is that they had an experience which threatened them and was traumatic, I'm going to be masking the symptoms and making them artificially feel better when now we've got this landmine underneath the surface of their emotions. And so what happens when they lapse their prescription, they forget to take a pill, or something re-triggers that trauma that's now lying underneath the surface and isn't dealt with? It's going to explode. And we've created this whole system where we're like, oh, you're getting better, you're feeling happier, right? We've treated this thing, you're cured. And so they've got all this faith in the system, this faith in themselves, that's all based on them improving, and then they have a bad day where something happens that reignites that trauma that was never sort of covered. Their self-esteem, their confidence in themselves is shattered. And so it's really important to make this distinction. And this is why we're talking about trauma thoughts and baselines for each of these. Thoughts, emotions, behaviors. Because by creating this baseline, we're able to avoid putting people in situations that give them artificial confidence, that give them artificial solid in their identity, and then just to set them up for a bigger failure in the future. We're setting them up to fall further. And if we think about the stories that we hear day to day, doesn't this resonate? We talk to people and we talk with individuals and they say, well, I went to this person and they didn't help. I went to this person and they didn't help. I got better here, but then I fell back in. What's the story that we're telling them? What is the message that we're communicating to their thoughts? Because if we tell them the wrong message, we may be setting them up for a greater failure in the future that then really shakes them. And you see that. They start to failure after bad circumstance, after traumatic experience. They get to this point where they're just like, why do I even try anymore? Why? I've got to eat and I got to have a place to sleep, but if you want me to do more than that, I don't get the point. I got to empathize with that. I get it. Yeah, if I was in that situation, I would too, right? Wouldn't I? And so we've got to think about these things. What is the baseline here? Is this a way that you think, or is this an experience that's created? And how are those two things? It's not really that cut and dry. How are these two things interacting one with another? That's huge for us. It's huge for us. And think about the implications here. If we can really identify this well and start to create a system where we understand the ways that these things interact, we can be so much more efficient. We can be so much more impactful. And the longevity of the improvement greatly increases because we're not just giving them a symptom fix, we're giving them a systemic fix. That then even when bad things happen, they've created a foundation of confidence in themselves that will last them to overcome that next obstacle, rather than reinforcing, I'm a failure. So, we can go through these, I suppose, but that was the main point. Hypervigilance, right? Self-blame, we talked about that for a second. In a situation of chaos, the brain doesn't like to accept that the world is scary and it has no control. So I'd rather blame myself and have a false sense of control than accept chaos. Self-blame, intrusive thoughts. Rehearsal, right? The brain will go back over things over and over and over again because it's looking for safety. And maybe we'll talk about that for a second. Intrusive thoughts and rehearsal really go back. They really connect one with another. A lot of my work outside of the counseling office actually relates to dreams and nightmares. So I actually do, if you look up my social media stuff, a lot of my online presence is about interpreting dreams, right? And typically that's thought of as like spiritual almost, or like metaphysical, which is sad in my head because there's a lot of really good science behind what dreams mean and how important they are. One of the greatest things is we know that dreams and nightmares are the very first indicator of trauma. So before you even start to see maladaptive thoughts or maladaptive behaviors, you're going to start to see those nightmares happen first. And so if you can pay attention to someone's dreams and nightmares, it's an early warning indicator for trauma. You can actually diagnose it quicker and start to treat it faster. It's like cancer, right? Before this starts to spread to the rest of the brain, to the emotions, and then to the behaviors, we can notice it in the dreams and then start to intercept before it gets too bad. And that's why I really love dreams, because dreams are a window into that unconscious motivation, that unconscious emotion. And again, I don't mean anything spiritual or metaphysical about that. What I mean by the unconscious is all the parts of the brain that operate independently. There's a lot of things that your brain is doing right now, even as I speak, that you don't have to think about. You know, it's digesting your breakfast, hopefully, if you didn't skip it. Digesting your breakfast, right? It's taking in auditory data, it's taking in visual data, right? It's regulating your emotions in the amygdala. It's connecting the two hemispheres of your brain with the corpus callosum. It's organizing your memories of the things that I've said in your hippocampus. All of these operate automatically. And that's what we mean when we say the unconscious. Traumatic experiences go directly into the unconscious, into these automatic systems of the brain. You can use those interchangeably, honestly, unconscious or automatic systems. And so dreams are a great way to pay attention to what snuck past my conscious defenses and got right into my automatic systems. Because the typical way that our thoughts are supposed to work is there's a two-tiered system. There's the conscious thinking, which is actually a smaller part of the brain. It's about 12% of your brain mass. And then there's a larger part, the other 88%, which is your automatic systems, your unconscious brain mass. That conscious part, prefrontal cortex, what its job is to assess all the data that's coming in. You know it. We watch TV, we listen to the radio, we scroll through social media. There's a lot of data coming at us. And let's be honest, a small percentage of it is actually helpful. Right? There's a lot of it that's not even true, right? You know, I love the unconscious suggestions of commercials, right? You know, they've got this group of people, you know, they're all on the beach, they're all beautiful, the sun is shining perfectly on their skin, their hair is done by a hair and makeup team, and they're holding an alcoholic drink, right? They're like, oh, what's the unconscious suggestion there? What's the automatic system? It's like, well, if you drink this, you'll be beautiful too, and you'll have friends. Life will be a vacation. No, probably not. I wish. It's not that easy. But you can see, because all of that data is coming in, the ideal situation is for the thinking part of the brain to say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right to me. That doesn't sound quite it. But oftentimes those things sneak in. Now, that's just a commercial, right? It happens very fast. They're strategically made in a way that bypasses your conscious thinking. But think about how much more a traumatic event is going to bypass your conscious thinking. When our brain is thrown into fight or flight systems, and we have to react without thinking, because if I take that nanosecond to think, I may not be alive anymore. Well, it's set up that way. And so we really, when we're thinking about someone's trauma thoughts, when we're thinking about the ways that somebody interacts with the world, we want to think, okay, what is in their automatic system? What are their automatic beliefs about the world? And this will really surprise clients. If you stop and get them to kind of write a thought log about what's going through their brain, they'll kind of be surprised with what they write down. You know, they're like, because they'll come into your session, or come into your office for support, or your institution to receive services, and they'll be thinking things. They will be having these automatic thoughts, and if you get them to stop and slow down and reverse the system, right? Bring those automatic assumptions back into conscious thought by writing them down on paper and thinking, what is it that I'm really processing in my head? They'll surprise themselves. Hey, why is it that anytime you go out with your friends, you get really socially anxious? I don't know, I just do. That's nice, but let's slow down a little bit more. What is it really? What are you telling yourself, right? Last time I went out with a group of friends, that was the time I was assaulted, Or last time I went out with friends, I didn't know, but they had all been talking behind my back, and that's why I felt weird in that situation, and then I felt lonely and I felt strange. That's tough for a normie, for a normal person. Think about somebody who already feels ostracized because they think different. ADHD and autism and OCD and disassociation and different intelligence levels and learning disabilities. It's going to be even more. And so sometimes even just the fact of being different, the neurodiversity, can be a sense of trauma in itself. And so we got to think about these thoughts. Intrusive thoughts in rehearsal are another great way to pay attention to what's in that automatic system, right? These intrusive thoughts people will get really kind of upset with themselves about. And maybe this is a good, we can go around the room with this one. Who has also experienced intrusive thoughts? You ever have that one? Everybody, right? Everybody. If your hand's not up, I don't know what you're talking about. But it's like, who's ever been driving down the road and had that intrusive thought of, what if I just...
Literally.
Right? Because you're like, I'm not crazy. Not me. It happens, right?
Right.
You know, you're standing on a ladder doing something in your house. You're like, what if I just like, you know, you're like looking over the edge. You know, you're a beautiful place. You're on top of a mountain. You're looking over the edge of the mountain. You're like, what if I just... You're like, I'm a crazy person. I can't tell nobody this. So, but okay, let's take this as an opportunity, right? This is an automatic thought showing us something about our automatic system. Let's look at it for a second. Like, let's not judge it. Let's take it with openness and curiosity, right? The foundation of how we started this conversation. What's going on there? Like, it must not be that unique because we all experience it in this room. So it's, okay, what is that? What will often happen with trauma, or just in general, especially with dreams, our brain will think about the worst possible outcome in order to rehearse it and keep ourselves safe in the event that it happens, or to prevent it from happening altogether. So it's like, if I think about, what if I just swerve my wheel into the wall while I'm going over, you know, the Sanford Lake? What my brain is doing is saying, driving is a really dangerous task. And you are the one controlling where this vehicle goes. You better really pay attention right now. This is important. When you're on the edge of that cliff looking over, and it is beautiful, sun is setting, the birds are there, you can hear the wind in the trees, it's amazing. Your mind is thinking, hey, I know you're having a great time, but pay attention, okay? Like, that's, I mean, one step, it's over. That's not a good time. So let's just make sure we okay. That'll happen. But if I already have a system inside my automatic thoughts of, I'm not normal, I'm different, my brain's crazy, I can't trust myself, and then I have intrusive thoughts, which we just identified as normal, my automatic thoughts are, I'm not normal, so this thing must not be normal too. And so you can see it can be even more intense for somebody who's maybe in the neurodivergent spectrum. Dreams are that way, right? People ask me all the time, why is it that every night I rehearse and I dream again of this traumatic event happening? Your brain is desperately trying to keep you safe. It's like, that was pretty terrible. Let's make sure it never happens again. Let's go over it over and over and over again until we're certain that we're safe from it. Right? I mean, when we're designing roads or we're designing cars, what do we do with them? We crash them into brick walls. Like, this is something we know. Your brain does this too, right? You know, if you want to make sure that the car that you've created, you know, Ford or, you know, Chevy or whatever, they crash them into walls over and over. Just be like, okay, let's see if a terrible, terrible crash happened. How's this car going to react and respond? Is it safe? Oh, okay, well that wasn't good. It kind of like tore in half. Let's fix that one. Your brain does that too. It's like, what if I jumped off a cliff? What if I swerved over the edge? It's like, okay, that was, yeah, I can imagine what that would be like. Let's take steps to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Or even if I start to head down that road, that we can kind of pull back from it. But a lot of people think that they're crazy. Like, this is a bad thought. Why am I this way? Am I broken? Am I unhealthy? Am I unwell? No. Let's normalize ththose things. Let's approach it from curiosity instead of judgment. It's huge. And so we got to start to assess these things. How are we on time? We're getting close. I got about 10 more minutes for a break. Cool. Confusion, disorientation, victim mentality, and hopelessness. Talked a little bit about thoughts. There's a little bit of a deeper level to thoughts that I want to share with you before we take this break. There's systems of thinking, and those systems of thinking are how we interact with the world. As we interact with the world, before we even get to the emotional part, which is next slide, those systems create our identity, who we believe that we are, right? And so somebody who is maybe a little bit more prone to paying attention to sensory information might appear sort of hypervigilant. Other people may notice that hypervigilance, start to make comments on it, and then we start to develop opinions about ourselves. I'm an anxious person. That can be tough, because now it's not just something that I do, it's something that I am. We see this all the time inside of our therapy offices. We see this all the time when people are approaching us for services. If you catch things early, it's just like, I do this thing and I find it kind of problematic. We do that thing long enough, it becomes a part of how we define ourselves. Oof. I hear that a lot when I talk with people about their depression and their hopelessness. Instead of it just being, I feel hopeless, I am hopeless. And a wonderful author, if you haven't read her, you definitely should, Brené Brown, talks about this quite a bit. Anyone read Brené Brown? She's pretty popular. She's on the Oprah Book Club and the whole thing, Brené Brown is great because she talks about this from the standpoint of guilt versus shame. And she makes a huge distinction between the two, guilt and shame. She says, guilt is, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. Shame is, I am something wrong. And so we want to pay attention to that in the people that we're serving, right? Is this person just like, hey, I made a couple mistakes, things didn't work out the way that I wanted to, I need some help to get things back on the right track? Or is it that spiral that we talk about where it's like, now I am a failure? It's not the thing that I tried failed, it's I consistently fail. This is a part of my identity now. And so we want to pay attention to that, kind of those two levels of thoughts, the intrusive thoughts and what we're thinking, what our cognitive structures are, but then deeper, how that influences our identity about ourselves. Because we haven't even gotten to emotions yet. This is just how we're perceiving ourselves. And that comes from our experiences, that comes from what people are saying back to us. And just to tag on to the end of that, think about if you think differently and you're neurodivergent, how those things where people are always telling you that you're different start to affect the way that you perceive yourself as well. Okay, I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to open it up for a little bit of questions here. If we got some questions, whatever we wrote down, and we'll get to the rest when we kind of come back. Yeah, we're doing great. Cool. Sign up. Let's do it. Here, let me do this, because I do want... It's too early for this. You can't be quiet. Wait a second.
Oh,
For posterity.
I don't know if
You
this
can hold it too. It looks good.
well,
Just because otherwise it's not hearing anything.
when you were talking about the neurodivergence, just the, autism and all the other different titles that were given there, it just made me think of the TV show, The Good Doctor.
Yes.
Watching that just was a visual to really help me to understand if someone did not take time for that young man and to realize his thinking pattern actually caused him, if none of you have seen it, you need to watch it because it's very insightful with what he's discussing, right? It's called The Good Doctor. No, it's a regular TV show, but you probably can find it on Netflix.
I can find out.
It's on like
And, but he is socially the most awkward. And if you dealt with just the social part, you would just put him off. Say, you're over here.
Yeah.
You're too different. But because someone took time to understand his thinking pattern, which is what you were talking about, and to realize he sees and he understands the body and the neurology aspect in a way that most doctors don't. And they began to come to him and the difference that has made in this hospital. It is just a good visual to not just take what society has said is there's no hope for that person and to do what you said.
Absolutely.
What do they have to offer?
Yeah, no, it's a great example. I love that show. Did you have, who was it over here? So go for it.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
For sure. So, what type of dreams have you found that's typical of an individual with trauma?
Yeah, that's great. So there's usually actually a couple kind of levels based on how they get better. And that's what's so fascinating. Like, this is my whole thing. This is what I travel and speak doing around the country, is when you notice somebody's dreams and the nightmares that they have, they'll start to change based on how much they're getting better and the progress that they're making. So not only can you identify, but you can also track progress through dreams. So usually the very beginning one is it's complete rehearsal. Right, so they're reliving the trauma over and over again in their dream. As they start to heal, it starts to get more metaphorical, right? So it's like, I had a sexual assault dream, right? And so it's just replayed exactly what happened. As they improve, instead of it being a total rehearsal, it'll be, I was running through a forest and I was being chased by wolves and they ate me. So it's like, ooh, okay, we're making progress, we're getting better. It's still, the core fear is there, but we're moving through it. And then you'll start to notice the roles sort of shift. They develop like an appreciation for the wolves, or the wolves actually start to help them, or they end up attacking the wolf instead of the wolf attacking them. They're actually able to defend themselves. This is how we kind of track progress through dreams. So it's nuanced, actually, and you can see a lot of different changes and a lot of diagnostic indicators through tracking the dreams. Yeah, which is fascinating.
That's good.
Yeah. Did you have one too? I'm sorry.
Just wanted to know, I know you started off in the beginning stating we shouldn't go into the, I guess, counseling experience trying to help. Mm-hmm. So what would be the other way? Because I know you said curiosity. Can you just help me see it from a different perspective? Because I'm at burnout now. I'm just hitting everything.
That's real.
So I will be checking in with you. I need your card. Let's do it.
That's great. So yeah, Jess, that's cute. Curiosity. I love that. You really got me thinking. But what does that mean? When we're talking about curiosity, right? It's curiosity towards a goal, for sure, right? But there's that subtle difference of, I'm not necessarily trying to help because I want to respect you as an individual and respect that this is your journey. And that's the big distinction I'm trying to make. I respect your journey, but I am here to be curious with you and to empower you by discovering these things together, holding hand in hand, walking this path with you, discovering these truths together will inspire you to make changes in your life. I'm not going to make the changes. I can't do it, right? I can help provide shelter for you. I can help provide support for you. I can give you a warm meal in your belly. But at the end of the day, it's going to be your success, right? And so I want to respect that by not trying to necessarily fix it for you, which is what I'm talking about when I say help, right? Fix it for you. Curiosity is let's walk this journey together. And my goal, I'm not a therapist who gives a lot of homework. There's nothing wrong with homework, right? I'm looking at Sarah. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with homework. I know she does. My feeling is, if we didn't get to something in that session that was so profound, it doesn't inspire you to make behavioral changes, then I probably didn't do my job super, super well, right? That's what I want to do. Good question. There's one over here. Yeah, oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch. Yeah, sure.
So I wanted to add on to something about the ADHD and how it's dopamine deficiency is why there's so much about procrastination that you see, and you're like, what do you mean? Just do the task. Why are you waiting so far? So I want to give you an example. Everyone, use your imagination. There's a report due for work by the end of the day, but it's 5 minutes to lunch, and they provided catering, and you skipped breakfast, and you are so hungry. Okay? So are you going to finish your report and skip lunch, or are you going to go eat a sandwich and then do your report? Right? You're going to go get a sandwich first, right? So when you have ADHD, the need for dopamine is like the need for food, where it's like you need that stimulation, you need that reward. You're so hungry all the time. So am I going to do the boring book report, or am I going to seek the easy reward that stops? I'm holding up my phone for the recording. Yeah, are you going to seek the easy reward first to fill yourself up? But then the problem with ADHD is, because your brain is divergent, you can never stop being hungry.
Beautiful. Great analogy. Let me be respectful. I'm not going to go anywhere. I've got time to answer all the questions, but we are going to take a break now. for a few, but I'm going to stick around. So if you want to stick around and ask some questions and get them answered, I'd love to do that. But do you need to say anything before we go to break?
No, break. If you need the restroom, it's right in the front where you came in at on those doors. And let's come back. You want to do 10 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, 10, 15 minutes, whatever we need to do.
Let's come back in 10 minutes. It's 10:30. Let's be back in the room at 10:40.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Yeah. I'm going to still record, honestly, if that's okay.
I want to follow up on her question. Where will sleep paralysis land?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I get asked that on my social media all the time about sleep paralysis. It's kind of like depression, right? You've got to eliminate, okay, where's it coming from? Sleep paralysis can definitely come from stress, anxiety, trauma, but it can also come from, like, I started a new medication and it threw off my circadian rhythm. So what is happening in sleep paralysis is when you go to bed, your brain and body disconnect. And that's really, really helpful because when you're running in your dream or punching the monster in your dream, you're not punching the person sleeping next to you. That's the way that sleep is designed. But if you're very stressed, if you've got a new medication, even if you've had something like cake before bed, something that stimulates your body, like with a lot of sugar, your brain and body might not disconnect in the way that they're supposed to. And so when you're waking up, usually the brain and body reconnect in synchrony. But if you're stressed, have a different medication, something like that, you may wake up before the body reconnects. And so you're laying there awake, but your body is still not connected with your brain receiving the signals. That's what sleep paralysis is. That can happen due to stress trauma, but it can also be medical.
If there wasn't any medication involved and there's like sleep paralysis happening constant, then it's like stress, and is that like what's happening?
So if no medication has changed, nothing in the diet has changed, I would check two things. Is my sleep routine good? Like, am I going to bed consistently? Am I getting enough sleep? And if that's normal too, then it's going to be emotional. I'm going to look at the emotions. Yeah. So I see a lot of people like shift workers, people who aren't getting enough sleep, new parents, right? They experience sleep paralysis too, but it's not emotional. It's because their sleep patterns, their sleep hygiene's poor. Yeah.
I
Cool.
really need to like get with your friend because I have sleep paralysis since I was little.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, so many people talk to me about sleep paralysis. Like so many people talk about sleep paralysis on my social media channel. We made merch that has like a sleep paralysis picture on it, and so we sell hoodies that actually are about. That's how popular it is. We sell like hoodies and stuff.
I fight it. Like
Yeah.
in my sleep, I know I'm sleeping. I start fighting myself.
Yeah.
And I start telling myself like, "You're sleeping. Wake up." Mm-hmm. And then my aunt tells me like, "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard." Like somebody fighting.
For some people, it's super common. Like it happens a lot to them.
Like I feel like somebody's killing me, and I know I'm like dying, and I'm like, "This is a dream." And in my dream, I'm like telling myself I'm dreaming. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've definitely had that too. Anytime that you're aware you're dreaming while you're dreaming, by the way, that's what's called a lucid dream. Yeah, lucid dream. Now, some people can start to control their dreams through lucid dreams, but some people don't have any control. They're just like, I know this is a dream, but I can't do anything about it. But all of those fall into the category of lucid dreaming, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Is it? Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you break down the shame and guilt again?
Shame and guilt, yes. The differences in the comparison. Shame and guilt. Shame is I am something bad. Guilt is I made a mistake. That's why in court we pronounce somebody guilty, not shamety. I don't know. Right? You're guilty. You made a mistake. You did the crime. You got to pay the time. Right? We don't pronounce anybody shameful because we never really say you're a bad person. Right? It's like you did something you shouldn't have done. Yeah, you got to go, account for that. And so that's the difference. Shame is I'm broken. I'm a bad person. Guilt is I made a mistake. I need to correct this, right? And that's why we send them to correctional facilities, right? The whole system is kind of built on guilt and correction, but the emotional component that can be very dangerous is shame. Because think about if I'm a bad person and that is who I am, and I start to accept that about myself, think about what decisions I might start to make. I'm a bad person, so why does it matter? I'm gonna do these bad things. And so you can see how dangerous that can be. Yeah. Follow up?
So with the law and justice system, right?
Yeah.
A lot of minority people happen to go through it. And then in the correctional facilities, they're still being treated with shame.
Yes.
And they come out even more traumatized. So how would you suppose that the justice system could be more justice rather than injustice?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about today is big about that because the whole philosophy behind today's conversation is stop create a new baseline, let's figure out where this person's coming from, and then move forward. So it's like if somebody's of a different culture than what the predominant culture of that like community is, we need to create a new baseline for them. I was even talking to, well, I hope this isn't like super offensive, but I was talking with one of my interns, and so one of my interns had a situation where there was a couple in their office, and one of the partners was not as upset about the infidelity in the relationship as they expected them to be. And I was saying, now wait a minute, now listen, I was telling my therapist, I know your culture. I know that infidelity in your culture is all world ending. That's the end of everything. In many other cultures, it's almost assumed in some ways, right? It can be, you know. I'll let you think about that and stuff, but let's make sure like this person was thinking maybe this individual is hiding their emotions. They're not being totally honest with me. And I said, well, maybe, but they could also be responding to infidelity in a way that's congruent with their culture, but not with yours. Maybe infidelity is not as big a deal to them as it is to you. And so you have to think about this like, okay, is there some hiding, some boxing up, some inauthenticity about their emotional expression, or is this just the way that they view the world, which is different from my worldview? So it's something to think about. Yeah.
Do you do Spanish?
Hold on, let's do that.
I know you've been over there for long.
This goes back to dreams.
But I have one that I'm interviewing. Yeah.
What does it say about you when you can't remember your dreams? Like, you know it was traumatic, but you can't really remember your dreams too well after you wake up.
Yeah. So, not remembering your dreams is actually the way that the brain is made. Your brain is actually set up to not remember your dreams because it takes conscious concentration to tag an event as significant and then encode it in your hippocampus. When you are asleep, the conscious part of your brain is turned off. So there's no system available to say, hey, this dream was important, we need to encode it in our hippocampus. So it's actually very normal. It takes practice to actually start remembering your dreams. Some people are more natural at it, and they just remember like all their dreams. Some people like me, it takes a lot of work. Like I have to work pretty hard. But that's also because of my ADHD, and my prefrontal cortex doesn't work like a normal person's either. So it takes a little more practice. Yeah. Yeah, you were next. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is centered around like masking. Like if a client has a lot of trauma around expressing their neurodivergence, how do you make them feel safe in like being able to unmask around people, or like will they ever get to that point if they have trauma around that? How can you even identify somebody is masking, things like that?
That's a fantastic question. I go about it two ways. One, they're pretty perceptive. So if your system is not set up to be safe for someone to unmask, they probably won't. And we have to respect that. So that's kind of number one. It's their choice whether they unmask or not. We can create a system that shows that that's safe, but they're going to know whether it's safe or not. The second thing would be, I find it really helpful when I talk with somebody that I have a sense is masking and I want to help them unmask. I give them information to let them know that I know. So I'll be talking with someone with anxiety. I know that part of anxiety symptoms is intrusive thoughts, but they may be scared of their intrusive thoughts, and the last time they told someone their intrusive thoughts, they said, "You're weird." So as they're talking about their anxiety, I'll be like, hey, you know, one of the things I know about anxiety that even I've experienced personally is intrusive thoughts. When I'm driving down the highway, I think about crashing my car into the brick wall, and I think that's weird, but I know that's just my anxiety talking. I've just modeled for them that I understand, and if they have that too, they can open up about it because I've just demonstrated understanding. But it's not assuming that they have intrusive thoughts, it's just demonstrating I am aware of these things, I've done my job to educate. It's very much like cultural sensitivity, right? It's the person's responsibility to educate themselves about the minority culture or the like sexual identity. It's not the minority or like the member of the LGBTQ's community to educate the populace, right? Where's the burden of education? It's on this person, not the minority, right? Same thing for us, right? It's our job as providers to educate ourselves about these things and then to demonstrate that knowledge to someone to make them feel safe. Yeah, that's how I would handle it. Yeah. Go Go for it.
Is it oh, dang, how did I word the question in my head? Okay,
okay.
so is it, I've heard that everyone has all kinds of neurodivergencies and it's dormant until a trauma opens it. Like, for example, postpartum depression.
Okay.
Before ever having this baby, you didn't have a hyperfixation on another human. You weren't waking up crying all the time. But now that you had this baby, there's that season of postpartum depression. Is that a bipolar gene that was in there that was never open until now, the trauma of birthing the child? Or does that make sense?
There's a couple things to that. I don't think it lies dormant. I mean, if you're neurodivergent and it's neurodivergence, not like an emotional development, it's going to be there. Like, this is just, it's like your genes, right? If I've got a sixth toe, I've got a sixth toe. It doesn't just start growing, you know? Weird example, but you get it. Now, I will make kind of a differentiation between postpartum depression. When somebody goes through that experience, their body physically changes. Like, when you birth a child, it's crazy. So I got to be careful. We're in a church, so I got to usually curse all the time. There have been like 15 times. Yeah, I'm like, I was like, wait a minute, I'm in church. When you have a baby, it changes your body, and it changes your hormones, it changes your chemicals. So a lot of that stuff develops not because it's like unlocking something, it's because you've literally changed. Now, what can also happen is somebody's neurodivergent and they've been neurodivergent. It's not like starting that neurodivergence, but what may not be traumatic for somebody else may be traumatic for them because this was always underneath the surface. Maybe just nobody identified it. Like for me, nobody told me I had ADHD until I was 30. I didn't know. I just thought I was weird. Yeah, I just thought I was strange.
Probably felt normal.
Yeah, I was like, it's just must be. Right, yeah.
Because that's how I feel like still.
There you go, yeah. Y'all crazy. Yeah.
Sleep paralysis was like a demon thing, like.
That's what I've been told. A demon sitting on your chest and about to suck your soul.
And then like dreams is like a way of like, I don't know, it was very negative, so I never like opened to talk about it until I started watching his TikTok.
Oh, that makes me so happy. That makes me so happy.
Follow him. I've been checking his social media.
It helps. Thank you. That means the world.
You gotta follow him. And then the person with the dog and the
Oh, Brittany and Honey.
Yes, you can talk about him. Like he's I forgot. He has a condition where he sees monsters, or like.
Oh, you mean schizophrenic hippie? Yeah, I talk about him a lot. Schizophrenic hippie is also on TikTok, and he has schizophrenia. Yeah, and so he gives a very honest picture about his experience with schizophrenia and how he deals with it. He's a motivational speaker. He's an ex-convict, and so he's like got his life back together, and he makes content online, and he's great. He's one of the greatest resources because it's lived experience, right? I'm not reading it from a book. He's like, this is how it actually is for me, and so I love that. It's such a great. Yeah.
Just one more. I just wanted to know. I think you said it in the beginning. How can you tell the difference between when you meet someone, if it's more so traumatic or neurological? Like, you know, when you're trying to treat them, is it just because they've gone the depression? What is the cause of it? How do you differentiate between the two? Is it more so attached to trauma, that landfill, that landmine that you talked about, or is it neurological? What are the questions you normally ask?
Baseline questions. What is your baseline, right? So back to what we were talking about on the slides, it's like if somebody has a big experience and then they develop depression, you're going to see that. Experience then changes emotion. If it's not that 1-2 step process and they've just kind of always been depressed, right? Or they've always had rapid thoughts, or they've always been paranoid, and there was no like preceding cause, like preceding experience, we're talking more like neurological stuff. That's how I'm gonna look. I'm trying to find the precipitating factor, right? Yeah.
Okay, baseline. So going back to thought, like why do you think that way? Is that the baseline?
The baseline would be, the baseline is, how is this person normally, right? Did it change because of an experience then it's like, okay, this is related to the trauma. But if this person has always kind of thought this way, and that's just their baseline, okay, then we're dealing with something either that's neurochemical or is more like neurodivergent.
Is that why therapists be like, so tell me about your childhood and tell me about the time when you were 5? Is that why they start there?
A therapist shouldn't like automatically go there. They should let the client lead them there, right? But they might ask that just to kind of eliminate that. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go all the way back. Like when you were a kid, were you also kind of just sad, right? Or they start to think, well, when I was 5, I was pretty happy. When I was 7, I was pretty happy. But then after I got really bullied at 8 years old, I started being less happy. Got it. Okay, we found it, right? Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Yeah, of course. Sorry, just to go back to the sleep paralysis thing, I skipped your question. The sleep demon thing, why that happens, and it's like huge in the religious community, it's not a demon because your brain hasn't fully woken up, but your eyes are open and it hasn't reattached. You'll actually see dream images in your waking world. And so that feeling of heavy pressure on your chest, like a demon sitting on your chest, is actually what we all experience while we sleep because our breathing is so shallow when we sleep. That's a very normal part, but usually you're not awake and aware to experience that shallow breathing. Sleep paralysis is actually one of the safest things. Nobody's ever been hurt with sleep paralysis. And people ask me that too, like, what if I fall asleep in the bathtub and I like roll over and I'm paralyzed? Will I drown? No. The brainstem kicks in, you snap awake, and you get out of the bathtub. So it actually is very safe. It's just the experience is scary because usually you're not aware of what it feels like to be asleep because you're asleep.
So what I used to get out of sleep paralysis, what I used to get out, it's like I start breathing more heavier. So that's how I'm able to get out of it. Because otherwise...
Yeah, because you're waking up. Like when you breathe heavier, that's like waking breathing, not sleeping breathing. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I just want to comment to your point of the when you say that we take responsibility for something or we become it. They do that in the medical profession as well.
Yeah.
I know I've experienced it a lot with being diagnosed with diabetes. People say, "Are you diabetic?"
Right.
So
yeah, it
now
becomes identity.
Right. And
no, good.
My response is always, "That's my diagnosis." Because see, if
good
I
for
feel
you.
like I'm
Tell
diabetic, that means that I don't feel like I can reverse it. I don't feel like it's going to get better. It's just like you say, my identity. And I told my endocrinologist this. If you feel like I'm at the point where neuropathy, high blood sugars, insulin is part of my diagnosis and part of who I am, then you're not going to work hard enough to help me get out of that.
Exactly.
You're just going to continue to diagnose me or continue to give me prescriptions to say, okay, well, here's your insulin prescription. Go ahead, see you in 3 months, 6 months, a year. But if you see it as something that can be worked on, that can be changed, if not alleviated but made better, then you'll work harder and you'll work. And I left him like, okay. When you want to come back to see me,
that's right.
Whenever you're ready, you just let me know.
Yeah.
Because I'm like,
because you're advocating for yourself also, and that's the key.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Okay, all right, we ready? We all back? We're feeling refreshed and ready to go? Woo woo. All right, cool. Thank you all. All right, so let's get to the next part, right? We talked about thoughts. Let's talk about what do we got next? Emotions. Whoop whoop. So I'm glad we spent a little time on thoughts because I think it's important. I think it's because it's so much buried deep inside of this sequence, inside of this process, it's the one that gets the most forgotten. So I wanted to spend a little bit extra time on that. We'll go a little bit quicker now. Emotions. Pay attention to trauma emotions. There were some great questions over the break that we were able to talk about and sort of get written down. A lot of what I'm noticing the questions is how do we know the difference between neurodivergence, neurochemical, and trauma? And it all goes back to that very first slide with the big stop word on it, create a new baseline. When I'm talking with somebody and somebody's coming to receive services from the clinic or wherever it is from the company, I want to figure out what is their baseline, right? And a good doctor is supposed to do this. What is the baseline? We're always trying to get back to, when I say baseline, what's normal for them? It's probably good. I should probably say that. What's normal for them? I've had interactions with some clients where we get to, we've done all this work and they're just like, I just don't feel happy like so-and-so. And I was like, well, okay, let's talk about that. Have you ever felt happy like so-and-so? They're like, no. Then it may not be reasonable for you to expect to be happy like so-and-so. They're like, well, that's sad. I was like, well, only if you think of it as sad. I was like, here's the truth. When we study those people who are diagnosed with depression, those individuals actually score higher on perceptive tests and their ability to accurately perceive information than somebody who doesn't have depression. Somebody who is not depressed usually kind of sees fairy tale fantasy. They think of the world as happier than it actually is. Somebody who's depressed is actually more honest and analytical. Maybe that's anecdotal evidence, thinking, well, that's why all accountants, like a good accountant, you want to hire a depressed accountant. Because they really... they ain't making up the numbers. They're like, it's not good, homie. But it's true. And so it's like, and then you ask this person, it's like, well, do you want to be happy like them? Like, what do you think about them? Well, I think they're stupid. And I was like, that's what I thought. I was like, if you were to be happy like them, you wouldn't be able to take yourself seriously. You'd be like, what is this fairy tale, sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns, son of a gun, right? And so it's like, don't make somebody else's baseline your baseline. That's the point I'm trying to get to. So when we're talking about emotions, think about what's the baseline for this person. Are they a happy, bubbly person? Or are they not a happy, bubbly person? Just because they're not happy and bubbly doesn't mean that they have had trauma. That just may be their natural personality. We need to be sensitive to those things. How you'll know that something is trauma-related is there will be a precipitating factor. There will be an antecedent event, right? Something will have happened, and then you'll see a change. Their brain may have not made the connection between those two things. I got in a car accident, and now I'm unhappy. It may be our job as the professional in the room to make that connection, but you'll see it. Something happened, and then a change. Not, I've always been this way. Now, you may have to go back. Someone asked a great question about, is that why therapists always ask about your childhood? I'm like, well, a good therapist will let the client lead to childhood. They won't just push them there. But it can be a good question if you're trying to assess, were you also like a happy, bubbly child? Or were you always kind of like quiet and contemplative and introspective and thoughtful? Okay, always that way? That's probably just you. That's great. We should celebrate that, right? Or then they go back and think, well, when I was 7, I was like carefree and enjoying sports and having a great time. But then when I was 11, I wasn't. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What happened between the ages of 7 and 11? Now we're digging, right? Curiosity kicks in. So pay attention to those emotions. Numbness, right? Not feeling things, huge trauma sign, right? It's kind of like an emotional dissociation. I don't want to feel how terrible that event was, so I'm kind of like emotionally separating from it. Fear, anxiety, panic, disassociation, alienation from others, right? Other people can't understand me because they haven't had this experience that I've had. Distrust and anger. A lot of people, I'll stop on anger for a minute. A lot of people don't know. Well, maybe I'll ask. Does anybody know that anger is a secondary emotion? You ever heard of this? Yeah? Oh, man. My people. Okay. Anger is a secondary emotion. It always covers up the primary emotion of fear and pain. And really, when we get down to it, it's just pain because fear is future pain. I can see the pain is coming, so I'm afraid of it coming, so it all really comes down to pain. Anger is an emotion that protects and covers up from pain. So what you'll actually see, and this is huge, a lot of therapists make this mistake. They will be nervous about a client's anger after trauma. But for me, getting that anger back is a good indicator that we're recovering from trauma. Anger still means that there's fight in there. When I see somebody who's numb and disassociated and alienated, that's a sign that we're down here with trauma recovery. If I can get them to start feeling angry again first, we're on the right track. I'm starting to say, hey, I'm upset because that wasn't right. Cool. We're connecting with the event. We can heal from there. But if there's no anger present, we got to start with that. And a lot of therapists are like, oh, anger is a bad thing. And it's like, not if you're recovering and dissociated from trauma. We got to start with anger. Anger is the step towards getting better. We'll get the happiness first, but we first got to get angry about it. That's good. That's healing. All right, we can move on to the next one. And again, any questions, just write them down. We're going to have another break before we go to lunch or whatever. Trauma behaviors. So now we're getting to the behaviors part. Thoughts, emotions, behaviors. These things all lead into what you will see. And this is where the big distinction between neurodivergence and trauma starts to come in. Exhaustion and sleep can be because of dopamine regulation. It can also be because of trauma. It can also be because of autism spectrum. Circadian rhythm, we know, is different in those who are on the autism spectrum than it is for a normie, but it can also be because of trauma. So what we're looking for is baseline. Has this person always had a sort of interesting sleep schedule, or did it start at a certain point? Confusion, hyperarousal, blunted affect, which means that I don't show a lot of emotions, right? Again, think about that. Somebody who's expecting normal emotions, but actually has autism spectrum, will not show their emotions on their face the same way that a normie will. And so I'm looking again, have you always been kind of like blank on the face, or did this start after a certain point? That's what I'm looking for. Withdrawal, headaches and sweating, some physiological symptoms, loss of routine, and then substance use. But again, all of these can be related to neurodivergence. It is very common with ADHD for them they're at a higher risk for substance use disorder than your average person because they're medicating their brain. If I don't get dopamine, back to the food analogy, which was so great, I may be trying to get those happy feelings from chemicals and from substances that I'm ingesting in my body, right? Have you always struggled with keeping yourself in a routine and regulating yourself? Or did this start after something? Because if it's trauma, a lot of people can either overeat or undereat because that gives them a sense of control when the traumatic event made them feel out of control. So it's a compensation. I don't want to deal with the reality of the world being a scary, dangerous, out of control place, so I'm going to control the things that I can. Food. So you can kind of see it's a precipitating factor. That can get so bad where it's like, I can't control anything. The only thing I can control is whether I continue to live or not. And that gets into, suicide. Okay, we can keep moving. What do we got next? Oh, yeah. Whoa, that's a lot. Whoa, that's a lot. Okay, so let's make it simple. I like simple. Here's 4 steps. Yay! Number 1, establish a baseline. Once you've got a baseline, this is kind of how this person basically is. We're going to go to step 2. Notice changes from the baseline. Okay, well, how are they normally? What is the change from the baseline? That's the thing I want to pay attention to. I don't want my baseline, and if this is what you hear, I hope this is what you hear. I don't want my baseline to be culture, society, everybody else. I want a unique baseline for every person that I'm interacting with. So it's like, what is your baseline? And I want to notice changes from their baseline, not from culture or norm. That's the difference. And that's how we're going to be able to assess the difference between trauma and neurodivergence. Neurodivergence is going to have a baseline that's very different from your normal culture. Trauma is going to have a spike that is separate from their baseline. That's the difference. A lot of people make the mistake of seeing this person is different. Okay, but is it different for them, or is it different from the culture you're expecting? If it's different from the culture you're expecting, neurodivergence. If it's different for them, let's assess for trauma now, because something may be going on. Now, we get to the not helping, the curiosity part. What's not working? Okay, what have you been doing? What have you been expecting, and how's that not working? If you're expecting yourself to get tasks done on time like everybody else does, but you have ADHD or autism spectrum, that's not going to work for you. You're going to need a much stricter schedule. So I have a very ADHD brain. Every 30 minutes in my calendar is blocked out because for everybody else, they may just be able to move task to task. But I don't know. Once I get done with a task, I'm in kind of dissociative limbo. I look at my phone, I'm like, oh, right, that's what I got to do next. And so every 30-minute block is accounted for in my day so I can move through it, right? Because otherwise I'll spend 2 hours. What did you do that 2 hours? I don't know. So that was not working for me. I needed to do something that worked for me. And that may be very different from what everybody else does. That's okay. It's not hurting nobody. This is what I need for me. And I want to, as a therapist, empower my clients to do what works for them. And finally, step number 4, misperceptions of reality. So now we're going to look at the last thing is what's not working for you, and then going back to the thoughts. What are you assuming about reality that's not true, right? I've always kind of used this illustration, kind of put my hands out. I'm like, if you want to understand what pathology is, psychopathology is, it's the difference between perception and reality. Our job as health workers, as people who are empowering individuals who need that, is to help bring perception back into alignment with reality so they match again. That's our job. So that's the 4 steps. There's a lot of theory and a lot of philosophy behind it, but in reality, it's 4 steps. It's kind of simple. Establish baseline, notice changes, what's not working for them, and then let's assess, are we aligned with reality? Is that manageable? We can do that, right? Cool. Okay, so now let's talk about how to care a little bit more. You can go to the next one. Thanks. I'm not going to go through all this. This is just nice for when you get the slides later, because you'll all get the slides. You take pictures too, but you'll all get the slides, and this is really nice to kind of look through of how our nervous system responds to trauma, fight, flight, or freeze. But I love the way that this goes over it and gives a little more detail. So just something, I wanted to add it somewhere. Thought it was good there. So we can go to the next one. Yeah, it's a good spot. Okay, actually doing some good. As we're thinking about how we've got that 4-step process, as we're actually engaging with that 4-step process, I want to pay attention to some of these things. Individual, right? Are the interventions that we're giving for them? Are these just part of our book, right? Is this just kind of the homework we give out to everybody? Or are we really taking into consideration what their baseline is and giving them techniques, homework, correction, direction, advice that's specific for them? Because the wrong advice to the wrong person can actually cause them to go backwards, and we don't want to do that. Developmental, right? This is helpful for baseline. What are their lived experiences? How did they develop? And that's why a lot of therapists will ask those questions about childhood. How did they develop, right? Was their speech delayed? Was their facial expressions delayed, right? Maybe assessing for some autism spectrum. If they're having a different kind of developmental experience, and I also notice them interacting socially differently, it's like, okay, that checks out, right? That's a neurodivergent experience. But if I see a vast change somewhere along that line, it's like, okay, I want to assess for what made that change. What experience did they have that changed them? Cultural, right? Operate within the cultural framework. I was talking to somebody during the break, and we made a great kind of connection. I had supervision with a therapist of mine, and we were talking about some clients and some marriage therapy stuff. And when we were talking about this marriage therapy stuff, there was a situation in which there was infidelity in the relationship. And the therapist was concerned that the one partner was hiding their emotions because they weren't as upset about the infidelity as they had expected this person to be. The therapist was kind of surprised, right? So we went through this process. Okay. What's the baseline? So I was like, is this your cultural expectation? Because I knew in that therapist culture, infidelity is a big deal, right? That's relationship ending. If there's infidelity in the relationship, relationship's over. But that's not everybody's cultural experiences. In many other cultures, infidelity can be just kind of part of it, right? It's almost expected in some places. It's almost kind of anticipated. And so if that's part of their culture and part of their expectation, hey, infidelity is just kind of part of working through a marriage, the therapist's response is not going to match that client. And so I want to pay attention to cultures. And so that was a great learning moment for them. It's like, okay, let's not apply my expectations, because if my boyfriend or girlfriend cheated on me, I'd be over it. But they're trying to work it through. So now I, as a therapist, am worried, are they being honest? Well, they might be, because infidelity for them is not perceived the same way as it is for you. And so we got to be sensitive to those things, and that's all right. 5-step plan. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Confrontation we're going to talk about as well. But there's a way to do healthy confrontation, and there's a way to definitely not do healthy confrontation. We got to be careful about that in our clients. There's a whole slide on those two, so I'm not going to go too far. And then remaining neutral. I don't want to make assumptions. I want to make a baseline. Let me ask questions. It's not about me as the therapist. Doesn't matter what my baseline is. It matters what their baseline is. So we've got to keep our own biases, our own blind spots kind of at bay, and even be aware of those, right? That's one of, like I was saying, I'm kind of in the interview process for a lot of, actually right now it's like UCF students are all the ones, because like they just had their orientation classes, so they're all sending me emails. And so I asked them when they come in for an interview, I asked them, what are your blind spots? And a lot of them, the good ones, have thought about that question. A lot of them haven't thought about that question. And sometimes they give me a blank look and I'm like, uh-oh. And I tell them, like, let me give you an example. For me, I grew up in a pretty strict house. Everything had an order. You had to do it in a sequence. It was very, very much routine and structure first, right? And so my blind spot is that when I'm working with a client, my natural tendency is to want them to be free and expressive and creative and to be authentic with their emotions and express their emotions and just, throw caution to the wind, just be yourself, right? But for somebody who has anger management issues and substance use problems, let's not throw caution to the wind. Let's follow the 12-step plan, right? So you can see how my blind spot could get in the way because I'm applying my baseline to them. If somebody's got like bipolar, substance use, and anger problems, no, we need to follow the system, right? You have some homework, you have a plan that you need to follow for how to keep those emotions in check. For me, it was the other way around. It was structure then emotions. For them, it's emotions and structure. So my homework, my assignments are going to be very different. So I got to be aware of my blind spots. Remain neutral, build from zero. Don't come in with expectations. Yeah, okay, next one, we're good. Individually specific. Theoretical interpretation, right? Pay attention to what your thoughts are, right? How are we thinking about those people who need services and our clients? What are your automatic assumptions? And you see this, and I think a lot of us in this room feel very passionate about this because we notice that the general public labels those who are struggling. It's like, well, it's their fault. They're not smart, they're lazy, they're not capable, all these things. And so there's a lot of expectations, prejudice built upon these individuals. And so think about, what is your interpretation? What's your theory of how the world works? And are we coming from a zero baseline or are we coming in with prejudgment? Client personality. What's their personality? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they naturally bubbly? Or are they more analytical and, thought-oriented? I want to be specific to them. I want to be respectful of the way that they naturally behave. Information processing style, right? This is all about learning disabilities or even high IQ and giftedness, right? How are they processing information? Some people are very much driven by imagination and by dreams and goals and passions. Other people are more pessimistic, more realistic. I got to respect that. Client chemistry, how's their brain working, right? Kind of going back, I don't know if I said this out loud or during the break, but kind of making that distinction. If somebody comes in with depression, is this neurochemical or is this emotional, right? What is their neurochemistry like? What is their individual chemistry like? Because if I'm labeling something as trauma that's just a chemical change, I'm going to be giving them suggestions that aren't helpful. What's their baseline? What is their religious and spiritual beliefs? We've got to be respectful of those, right? And if there is something out of alignment, we got to confront those with empathy and care and say, hey, let's talk about this. Is this working for you? I totally respect it if it is, but let's also be honest here. Strengths-based approach, right? Instead of coming in with judgment, let's not focus on the things that you can't do. Let's focus on the things that you're very well good at doing. That didn't make sense, but the things that you are gifted in, and let's use those gifts to make up for or to even kind of counterbalance those things you aren't good at, because that's all of us. We all have things that we're good at and not good at. And so I don't want to put somebody in a situation that sets them up for disappointment because I'm putting them in an environment that's not built for them. Right? I was talking to a client this week, and I don't know where I came up with the metaphor, but I was like, a butterfly is an amazing creature, and a fish is an amazing creature. If I put a butterfly in the ocean, it's going to drown, though. right? So it's like if you're looking at a bunch of fishes and you're a butterfly and you're like, why can't I swim? Well, that's just not a helpful question to be asking. You're supposed to fly, right? Don't go swimming. That's okay. But if you're a fish, you look at the butterflies, you're like, why can't I fly? It's like, because you're not supposed to, right? So it's okay to say those things. There's some things you're supposed to do and some things you're not supposed to do. Don't come in with judgment. Make it individually specific for that person. If somebody struggles to like really get those tasks done, that may not be the type of person you want in like an administrative assistant position, because that their whole job is keeping a schedule organized. That's just not your gifting. That's fine. Like there are definitely things I'm not supposed to do because I'm not gifted at them. So I don't try and do them, and they also don't bring me joy and happiness. That's okay. So let's just be honest about that. Let's focus on strengths. Honesty. All right, we can go to the next one. Developmental understanding, right? What is the childhood context? What is the internal family system, right? What is the definition of man and woman? That's a big one. What does it mean to be respectful to your parents? What does it mean to be responsible to others? What is my responsibility to my community? Those are all going to be different based on culture. Back to the infidelity thing too. I got to understand that from a cultural lens. Adverse childhood experiences, implicit suggestions from the family, right? What does success mean for this person based on what my mom and dad taught me? What are my learned values and what is my learned helplessness? A lot of times you see this with individuals. The parents, even though they are trying to be positive and helpful, give them the unconscious and automatic suggestion that you can't do it without me. And so the intentions are good. But there comes that suggestion of mom's always there to help me out, dad's always there to help me out. And so I'm learning, I can't do this on my own, I always need mom and dad. Then mom and dad pass away, they're not there, they're incapacitated. Well, what am I left to believe about myself? I've developed this identity about who I am, talking about the trauma that's ripped away. I can't do things on my own, I always need my parents, then they're not there. Oof, that's tough. So think about the development, right? What has this person learned about themselves? Going back to thoughts. All right, we can go next slide. Culturally sensitive. They really go hand in hand. We talked about this a little bit. What's their ethnicity? What culture did they grow up in? What is their identity, right? Does that match with who they are authentically in their neurochemistry and in their personality and their self-expression? Cultural trances and unconscious assumptions. That's borrowing from some hypnotic language, some hypnotherapy language. We're all in trances. And when we talk about trances, what we mean are, what are those automatic thoughts, right? And so kind of back to that question of, can you make somebody squawk like a chicken or bark like a dog in hypnosis? Yeah, if you get them into a moment where they're super concentrated and you start to suggest that this is their natural language, right? In a very manicured moment, they'll bark like a dog. That's how we are too. Think about all the things we assume about ourselves. Like, just even the way that you put your shoes on in the morning, the way that you dress, like, this is what I'm supposed to wear, this is what I'm supposed to be. These are all trances. These are all automatic systems in our brain, and sometimes they don't work. And so it's the therapist's job to kind of identify that and say, hey, you've always done it this way, but that really doesn't look like it's working for you. Let's talk about your culture, right? Let's do this in a way that works for you. Masculine and feminine being a huge one of those, and then learned limitations. What did I learn that I can't do? What did I learn that I'm not capable of? We can go to the next one. Okay, I got to give a huge shout out to, like I was talking about my school. There we go. Like I was talking about with my school, trauma-focused hypnotherapy. Credit goes to Zach Dodson for this. This is the 5-step plan that we teach in our trauma therapy course about how to interact with trauma in the moment. This is like crisis moment de-escalation tactics, because there's a way that information enters the brain and there's a way that we need to respond to get that information corrected. And so it's an in and out process. So the parts going in for this trauma are, what is the projective device? Don't worry, I'm going to break this down. Just struggle with me here. We got this. What is the projective device? Person, place, or thing that is bad. Second is, what is the construction of understanding? Why is this thing bad? Third, what is the use of it? How does this affect me, them, or us? What is the object of danger? The mode by which the danger comes toward me? And what are the instigators of danger, the auxiliary factors? So let's use a car crash as an example, right? The projective device may be the car keys or the car, right? When I see car keys or car, it's reminding me of this event. That's the projective device. What's the construct of understanding? Well, my understanding is I'm always supposed to be safe. I'm always supposed to be, like, maybe I got my kid's car seat in the back, right? And it's like my job as a parent to keep my child safe. So my construct of understanding is I have to always be safe, even though that's not really aligned totally with reality. Life is dangerous. But that's my understanding, so you see how it gets me in trouble. What is my use? How does this affect me, right? Well, the car got me into an accident last time. My theory is that I'm supposed to always remain safe, therefore I'm having a reaction to seeing those car keys or that car. What's the object of danger? Well, getting on the road is how the danger comes toward me. There's other cars on the road, and that's dangerous. And then finally, what are the instigating factors? Well, it could get so much to where if I hear an engine revving, or I hear a car horn beeping, I'm instigating because those things are around it. If I see a traffic light, right? If I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of traffic outside of my house, I may start to develop even agoraphobia because I'm too close to the road. So you can see how these parts start to build this trauma experience. So if you're going to help somebody in a crisis situation kind of remove themselves from this trauma, you got to start backwards. We got to remove them from the traumatic environment first before we can even talk about it. Because if they're in fight or flight mode, this part of the brain shuts down. We're not going to have any kind of conversation. They are in run, freeze, fight mode. We got to stop that first, eliminate number 5, bring into an environment of safety to start. That's why everyone in this room has such a passion about creating an environment of safety, giving them the tools, the basic necessities, shelter, food, care, right? Clothes, a nice shower, because until I take away the instigators of danger, I can't even have a conversation to heal the trauma first, because we're still in fight or flight mode. I'm still on the corner. Cars are whizzing by me. I'm trying to make ends meet. Okay, so we're in a safe place, right? Talking about car crash is our example. Object of danger. Okay, where's the danger come from? It's other cars. Okay, so we've got to have a conversation about what is the use of that car, right? Is that car just for danger, or are there some uses for it that could be helpful for you to get to where you need to go, right? What is the object and what is its use? Well, in Florida, in Central Florida, you can't get nowhere without driving. We're so spread out. So it's like, okay, I want to be successful. I'm gonna need to have some kind of transportation, right? So we're gonna have to make peace with the car or with the bus or with the bicycle, whatever it is, because it's being used towards my goal. Then, once we've kind of talked about that, we've kind of made peace with the object itself and taken away that unconscious assumption about the object, now we got to talk about our thoughts. You see how we're going backwards as well, from behaviors to emotion to thinking? The same way we talked about in the first half of today's session. We're working this process backwards. So what are our thoughts? If my thoughts are I need to always be safe, I will never get into a car. I will never be able to use it to accomplish my goals. And I will never have the environment of success that I would like for myself. So we've got to work it back to number 2, which is, what is my understanding? Reality is, we all are in danger all the time, but we manage risk. How much risk am I willing to accept in my life? You know? Maybe you don't drive a car anymore. Maybe you ride on a bus. That's okay. Maybe that's the level of risk that you're willing to take, right? If you are okay with a car, maybe you get a car that's got a great safety rating. That's the level of risk I'm willing to take. Some people ride motorcycles. Well, that's very risky, but for them, it brings them a sense of joy and a sense of freedom that they're willing to embrace that risk because it gives them the use that they would like. And then you work it back to the projective device. Now, cars are okay. Now I can get in my car, I can see my car keys, I have a better understanding of the world, I can get in and move forward. So that was a lot. I know it's a whole thing, and we spend a whole 50-hour course kind of doing this, but I wanted to at least introduce the concept for you to kind of see how it works forward and then in reverse for recovery. Cool. If you got questions, write them down. We'll talk them through. But as you work this process, pay attention to what pieces are being told to them for this traumatic event so you can start to use it backwards, because it's going to be crucial as you're working with those people who are coming to you for services to use their language, right? Car may be a normal part of my day-to-day routine, but notice their language when they talk about the car and use that in the way that you're talking to them. Because again, it needs to be their baseline and their individual experience, right? Notice their language. And then finally, it's going to have to be intentional. Direct, depotentiate is another hypnosis word. But what it means is take away the potentials for distraction. So as you're working this, use their language, but then be directive, right? Say, hey, come over here. Like, let's get away from this. First, we need safety. They need someone to guide them in that moment, especially when they're responding in crisis. So be direct. Take away the potentials for their distraction. Hey, it's me and you right now, right here. Okay? I've got this. You're safe in this area, right? We're away from that danger. Let's process this together. We got to create that safe space first to be able to start to take away the emotional intensity from this object, from this experience. And then design a new reality. Give them the driver's seat back so they can say, what do I want my thoughts to be? What do I want my emotions to be? What do I want my reality to be? So we can start to align. Cool. We can talk more about it, but I just wanted to go over it so you kind of understand what maybe a trauma therapist is thinking as they're working with someone who experiences these things. Cool. Okay, we can continue. Thanks. I want to spend some time on this, confrontation, because this is great. You're going to have to do this. Talking about, yeah, great. Talking about being intentional and kind of designing a new reality for someone to help them deal with trauma, you're going to have to confront their false thinking, their errant thoughts, right? If I think that I always need to be safe, and we all know in this room that life is inherently dangerous and it's all about risk management, not absolute safety, I'm going to have to confront that. There's a good way to do that and a not so great way to do that. And if any of you have ever tried to have a conversation or a corrective argument with a teenager, you all know this. There's a good way to do it, and then there's a way to do it that makes them double down. And then it's, oh no, I've just made it 10 times worse for myself. It helps not to give them the answer, but to show them their own internal conflict. That's the goal with confrontation. I really want to kind of break this down and think about this, because this is one of the most helpful things that I've ever found for my counseling practice. I never want to create interpersonal conflict. I always want to create intrapersonal conflict. I don't want the conflict to be between me and you. I want the conflict to be you and you. I am the curious, creative, helping observer. It's not about you proving yourself to me. It's not about you need to do things the way that I think you need to do them. It's about you arguing with the devil and the angel on your shoulder. That's what I want the experience to be. Well, I need to be safe all the time. Well, but I want to be successful and go to that job interview. I don't want to take on the role of being, well, you need to be successful and take on that job interview. I want that to be a conversation they have within themselves, and I'm listening, I'm encouraging, I'm validating, right? And so there's some helpful ways to do that. Playing dumb and acting confused is the best, right? And so when somebody says something that I'm just like, that ain't helpful, I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is, well, that's interesting, right? Let's give an example. Somebody says they're anxious. I give them some great homework that is researched, peer-reviewed, shown to be helpful, maybe some breathing techniques, right? Some grounding techniques that help with anxiety. We know from the research, grounding techniques and breathing exercises, fantastic for anxiety. I give them this homework. I say, here's what you're going to do this week. Anytime you feel this, you're going to do this. Great. They come back. I'm like, how'd the homework go? They're like, I didn't do it. It's a trap. If I get mad at them and I say, why didn't you do your homework? I'm becoming the bad guy. I'm creating interpersonal conflict. I don't want to do that. I want to create intrapersonal conflict. they're showing up because they need help. They're showing up because they want to get better. It's not on me to help them and to make them get better. It's on them to help themselves make them get better. I'm just here to make the tools and get the obstacles out of the way. So what I'm going to do is like, well, that's interesting. I don't know if I quite understand, Johnny, Sarah, whatever. Johnny, I don't get it. You came in here saying that you're anxious. And then we talked about some tools and you were very excited when you left my office. But then you came back, you said you didn't do them. Well, I guess I'm just confused. Can you help me understand what that's all about? I'm creating intrapersonal conflict, not interpersonal conflict. It does take a little more patience. It's a lot easier to say, well, you're messing up. You should have done this. Here's what you're going to do. We're going to try again this week. In fact, here's more homework. Here's 3 other ones you can do as well. No. You're setting yourself up for failure. And them. I want to put them in the driver's seat. So it's like, I'm going to play dumb. I'm going to play confused. I'll be like, I don't understand that. You say you want a healthy relationship, but then you're always bossing around your partner. Well, it just doesn't make sense to me. I imagine if I was your partner, I wouldn't feel very good about that, right? Can you help me understand? It's causing them to self-reflect. So confrontation is huge, but we got to do confrontation in the right way. Internal conflict, not external conflict. Empowering, not prescribing. Good way to pay attention to if you're doing this or not is open questions versus closed questions. Do we all know about open questions, closed questions? Yeah, get some head nods. Good. Just for the sake of it, open questions can not be answered with yes and no. An open question needs an explanation. A closed question can be answered with yes and no. So, did you eat breakfast? Yes, no, right? Are you happy? Yes or no? Did you do the homework? Yes or no? Closed questions, a little bit prescriptive. But if I ask an open question like, well, that's confusing. Can you help me understand, right? Why did it happen this way instead of the way that we talked about in session? Well, you can't answer that with yes or no. They got to do some reflection, right? What happened? When did it happen? Who, what, when, where, and why, and how are great. Pay attention to. The ones that you can answer yes or no, actually not going to be very helpful for going deeper and getting them to be the one in charge of their own healing. It's important to think about. Cool. Okay, we can go to the next one. That's important. And remaining neutral in this process. This is, oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, we got to talk about this one. It's important. It's important to remain neutral. Seeing some, yep, you know what I'm getting at. You know it. The thing that I see far, far too often, especially when it gets close to burnout, especially when we're burnt out ourselves, is we start to share our own story because we want to be heard, right? It's not the time for us to be heard. Now, there are many times where we can share our personal story as an asset for them, but let's pay attention to when they're glazing over in their eyes and not paying attention to the story anymore. Let's pay attention to who am I trying to serve here, myself or the client? And so if that story is going to be helpful to them, like I've shared a lot of stories about myself, but it hasn't really been about me. It's been about giving a personal example to augment your education here in this room. There's a difference. My job, though it may seem special being at the front of this room, I'm the lowest one in this room. I'm here to serve each and every one of you. And so while everyone else is kind of taking a break, I'm here to answer questions because my job is to serve. And so it's not about me. It's not a time for me to share my stories. There's other times where I do that. I got my friends for that. I've got my own social support and, my ways of preventing burnout. My job is to serve here, right? I'm the humblest one. I'm the lowest one in this room right now because it's my responsibility to help. It's not time to share the story. It's time to listen to their story. So that's going to be important, remaining neutral. I'm not here to serve myself. I'm here to serve them. Don't reinforce bad trances. Speaking of that story, right? I just had, not too long ago, a baby. He'll be 1 year old next month. And so I'm still pretty fresh dad. I'm very exhausted this morning. Grandma messed up his sleep schedule yesterday. My gosh. Grandma, you're killing me. Okay. But everybody is my first baby, right? My beautiful wife, she's amazing. She's such a great mom. But everybody would tell her what was going to happen or what she would experience or what emotions she would have. They all told me, like, you're going to feel this, you're going to feel that, this is going to happen. None of that happened. I didn't feel any of the things they told me to feel or what they thought I was going to experience because that was their story. And so when they're giving me this advice, what is the intention for that advice? It's not to actually help, because if they're actually helping, they'd ask me what I'm feeling. How are you doing? How are you hanging in there, buddy? They wanted to feel special. They had the best parenting advice, and I got the most insightful parenting wisdom from this person. They wanted to be the authority figure. Very self-serving. And so one of those things, and the danger of that, is reinforcing negative trances. They would tell me a lot of stuff that was their story that was unhelpful for me and actually gave me suggestions for bad things that would happen as I'm a parent. This happens to me all the time. My son's amazing. He's fantastic. He's very well behaved. And so people see us, strolling around. He's a great little dude. And so they're like, just wait till they get a teenager. They're going to be terrible. Why you got to say that to me? Why can't you just appreciate my child being a little angel right now, I don't care that your children don't listen to you. That's your problem. Don't put that on me. Leave me alone. I don't get it. Like, what's even the point? You just want to vent with somebody, and now here I am, a new parent, and you're like, this is my opportunity to be the authority figure and to vent. So self-serving. So self-serving. And it's not true. I would say like, it's going to be so terrible. He hasn't been terrible. Other things they told me are going to be easy have been terrible because that's our unique story. And so you can see how if I'm suggesting, or if a parent is suggesting, what do you think is going to happen to me if somebody in the public is saying, just wait till they get a teenager, it's going to be hell. It may be nice now, but it's going to be bad. That's creating fear in me about my child growing up. I ain't going to accept that. I ain't going to listen to that implicit suggestion. They didn't say, hey, you should be afraid that your child's going to grow into a teenager, but they didn't have to say it. What they were saying, it's worse, gave me the automatic suggestion. And so because it's an automatic suggestion, it's like the beer commercial, right? They're saying automatically, well, you'll be, skinny, beautiful, famous, happy, everything's going to be like a vacation if you drink this. No, it's not, right? I also should not be afraid of my child growing up to be a teenager. It's going to be a beautiful transformation for them. And I'm going to accept it with open arms and love, just like I accepted them coming into the world. Right? So be careful of what stories you're telling and what suggestions they're coming with. I'll tell you specifically for trauma how this is impacted. Good. The number one indicator of whether and the speed that a person recovers from trauma is the things that their closest relationships say to them directly after the event. The number one indicator of how fast they get better and how well they get better is what their close relationships say to them directly after the event. When a child comes up to mom and dad and says, hey, somebody touched me, or this bad thing happened, or I was with uncle or auntie and this is what went down. And the parent says, are you sure? What is that saying to them? Who's the first person being questioned? Don't trust them. Don't believe them. You're putting the burden of proof on the child, right? It's showing, hey, I'm not here for you. You have to prove yourself to me to earn love or to earn protection from me. There's ways, of course, to assess, right, what happened in that situation. But those first responses are so key because we're going to give them suggestions about what they should feel. And so if my first suggestion is, are you sure, or what were you wearing, or who were you with, instead of a hug, pulling them close, giving them the comfort and the safety that they need, right? Back to the 5 steps before, removing them from the dangerous situation, saying, hey, let's break this down together. I'm here for you. You're safe now. We're going to reinforce some terrible, terrible suggestions for them that's going to create, again, those landmines underneath the surface of their emotions. And so we got to pay attention to that. Avoid good and bad. This is good, this is bad. This is a good thing, that's a bad thing. Because I'll also see people will talk about their history and they'll say, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened to you. That's awful. Well-intentioned as that may be, what am I suggesting to that person when I say those things? I'm suggesting, this is so bad I almost can't believe your story. I'm suggesting, this is way worse than you may have ever even thought it was. That's suggesting this is so impactful and traumatic, it's going to take a very long time for you to get better. And so it's like, that's awful, that's terrible, this is so bad, I can't believe that. Careful. The worst one, I think, is, and we're all guilty of it, the worst one I think is like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Wait a minute. What am I sorry for? I'm sorry to hear that. What am I suggesting? I wish you didn't tell me that. Now I have to deal with your story. Ooh. And we say it because it's part of our culture, you know? It's unconscious inside of us. We say it as just like it's a natural turn of phrase. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope that everyone, after today's presentation, changes that to say, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm so sorry that's what happened, right? I'm not sorry to hear it. I'm glad you told me. I'm here for that. I'm honored, honestly, that you felt comfortable enough, and I receive your story with humility, that I'm the kind of person in your life who can hold space for that. Thank you. That's a blessing that you shared that with me. That's the kind of suggestion I want to give them. There's no story that you're going to go through that's going to threaten our friendship. You can come to me with everything. That's what I want to give. So avoid good and bad, right? This is so bad. You're like, sometimes I've got my good friend and my business partner, Zach, who we do this together, he'll tell me something terrible that happens in his life, and instead of having any response, he'll be like, what do you want to feel about that? That's usually my first response. I don't even say anything. I'm like, what do you want to feel about that? He's like, well, right now I just want to feel angry. I'm like, yeah, I'm angry with you too then. Great, I'll feel that with you, right? Or I just want to forget about it. I'm like, okay, let's forget about it. Let's talk about something else. Let's go somewhere. Let's go get a bite to eat. Suggestions. Best way to think about this is notice black and white thinking. There's two, I think we talked about this even last time that we did this presentation, but a great way to pay attention to and recognize trauma is black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is regressive and childlike. Little bit of brain anatomy. A child before the age of 8 years old is fully unconscious. They have no prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex starts to develop at 8 years old, doesn't fully mature till 25. And so when we experience trauma, it shuts down our prefrontal cortex. We're in automatic thinking because we need to respond. The impetus and the imperative that we have to act is more than we have time to think for. Time to shut down thinking, we need to act because any extra time spent thinking may mean death. Shutting that down, so our brain reverts to 8 years old and younger. 8 years old and younger is black and white thinking. If I don't get a cookie before bed, today's the worst day. This is an awful day, right? If I don't get exactly what I want, it's terrible. My little man is getting old enough where he's starting to throw temper tantrums. I'm like in the gym working out, right? And he's like wants to lift this weight too, and he can't because he's tiny. He's like, ah. I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy. He's like, it's the worst day for him. In that moment, this is awful. This is a whole day. It doesn't matter that we were watching Blue's Clues a moment before and eating Cheerios. Today is now terrible. And so we do that with trauma. It's like, I'm broken forever, right? I'm unsavable, I'm unhelpable. It's like there's nuance. So the more that we can start to pay attention to these first three things, but then also introduce some gray into this space of like, well, it's nuanced. It's like, well, yeah, it's bad, but there's also some things you can do about it. All sorts of things. I mean, we could talk about gray space for a lot, but I want you to pay attention to black and white thinking. When people start to enter into black and white thinking, it's a regressive mental state, and it's usually an indicator of either something that's lacked emotional development, they never grew up from that, or they threw them back into childlike thinking because of trauma. So that's huge, a huge way to like pay attention to and diagnose these things. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, wrapping up. We did pretty good. Let's talk about a little bit caring for yourselves. We talked about a lot of really heavy topics today. And a lot of really personal topics, honestly, that you may be even thinking about your own traumas. The reasons that you all got into this profession. I mean, nobody really gets into this without some kind of motivating experience. That's right, curiosity. Yes, look at this. All right, you get gold star. That's okay. Nobody gets into this without a story. And so maybe even as we're talking these things through, it's very natural to think about the topics that we're discussing in relation to your own story of perhaps trauma, being alienated, being isolated. So let's talk about how we can care for ourselves. We can go to the next one. Compassion fatigue and self-care. Empathy is tough. It takes a lot of mental energy to separate your own story and fully be inside their story. And then once that time spent with that individual is done, you got to separate from them and reattach to yourself. It's a lot. It feels like disassociative identity, right? It's like, I'm this person, now I'm this person. It's like, it's difficult. And so we got to recognize that. Like, we're one of the highest for burnout here. Boundaries. And so in that, it's like, where does the relationship begin and end? If you can have a good understanding of boundaries, it will help so much with burnout, right? Don't take those things home with you. This is their journey, not ours. I'm not here to help. I'm here to be curious, and that them getting better is a byproduct of curiosity and empathy. We'll talk about some self-hypnosis stuff too, because hypnosis is all about unconscious suggestions. And so I want you guys to think about the places that you work at, the structures that you work in, the systems that you work in, and what those things are suggesting to you. Because we all have procedures, we all have routines that we go through, and so maybe after today's discussion, we can think about, what are these routines suggesting? What is my routine prioritizing? Is it prioritizing other people, or is it prioritizing me? This is my life to live. And so if it's prioritizing others too much, if it's giving a suggestion that you're responsible for everything, well, that's gonna lead to burnout. We're kind of self-hypnotizing ourselves into being burnt out. That's not what we want to do. All right, we can go on to the next one, because we're going to break some of these down. Oh, maybe we're not going to break some of these down. I thought we had another slide. That's all right. But I do want to think about that. Then this is what I was going to say. I didn't think I put it in a slide. When we approach, and we'll end on this, when we approach our jobs with curiosity instead of help, it's the greatest prevention for burnout that we can have. It is the greatest thing. A lot of people, when they talk about burnout, when they talk about self-care, they talk about having a really stressful job and then taking time away from that job to re-energize. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but there is a suggestion there. The suggestion is, I'm not going to be fulfilled with what I'm doing, with what my career path is. I'm always going to need space away from it to enjoy my life. I don't want that to be the suggestion that I give myself. I want what I'm doing to be my enjoyment. I want every day that I wake up not to feel like work. Isn't that the goal for all of us, right? If you're in a job and a career that you really enjoy, no day feels like work. That's what I want, but that seems like such an elusive goal. And I think the key that they're missing when it comes to that goal is, if every day is approached with curiosity and I have really good boundaries about what's mine and what my limitations are, no day is going to need a burnout recovery day. I need to pay attention to myself. And throughout the day, instead of losing myself in my work, I need to pay attention to, how did that interaction make me feel? Am I being sensitive to what's going on? Am I paying attention to my emotional reaction to that story? And by listening to that emotional reaction, I'm recognizing what my unconscious suggestions are, or my traumas are. And so what's so wonderful to me is, instead of, listening to like a couples therapy session and then, bringing that stress home to my relationship, for me, it brings an appreciation like, wow, I'm so appreciative of my marriage relationship because I can see all the different stories out here for what other marriages look like. And so I'm so appreciative for who she is. So instead of coming at a place of fear, coming at a place of burnout, and coming at a place of curiosity and appreciation, right? It's emphasizing why my wife is an amazing person. And hopefully for her too, like why I hope I'm an amazing person for her. And so I think about it, instead of, it's like I have a stress cup and I need to pour out that stress cup every day, right? In order to have I got to go take a beach vacation so I can pour out my stress cup. I should have a cup, really. This would be much better. It's my stress bottle. Instead of filling the stress bottle up and needing to pour it out, I want to turn the cup upside down. And I only want things to go inside of my stress cup that I allow in there. I only want things to go inside of me that are part of my true identity and my authentic expression. Everything else that people are trying to pour into me, I want it to spill off the sides. It's almost like an iron umbrella, not a cup of stress. cup of stress. What a terrible unconscious suggestion. That I'm gonna go to work and every day I'm gonna fill up with stress and I gotta empty it on my own time. I hate that. Let's turn it over and have such a good identity of who we are and an appreciation and love for ourselves and a good awareness of our boundaries that everything that's not for me spills off my plate. That's a better way to do it. And so when we're talking about self-care, yes, take that time, go on vacation. We all need that. I'm not arguing against vacations. But what I am arguing against is, what are we suggesting? Am I suggesting that I am a vessel to be used and filled with stress, which is violating my identity and my integrity as a human being? Or am I saying, I'm just a wonderful traveler in this amazing universe that gets to experience all these different stories, and I only accept what's meant for me, and I hold good space for others so they can find out what's meant for them. And so maybe I'll end on that. And if we got questions, we could talk about them. Thank you all for your time and listening. I appreciate it. I hope it's been helpful. We did pretty good. We got about 15 minutes for questions. Yeah? Okay, cool. We'll do the microphone thing. If anyone's got questions, we're good for it. But yeah, okay, great. Can we pass that down? Yeah. Thank you. It just doesn't catch it. Yeah.
I was going to ask what your thoughts on EMDR are as it relates to trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thoughts on EMDR when it relates to trauma? I've got no... social media is pretty exaggerated. So on social media, I'm like the EMDR hater. Just because, like, you know, some good beef really creates good content. But I don't actually like fully believe that. My opinions on EMDR, obviously I'm going to admit my bias, right? I'm a hypnotherapist at heart. And so a lot of people that come to me are coming because they've had a negative experience or an abreaction. The EMDR actually made their trauma worse. Because what EMDR is, this is the way I think about it, EMDR uses all the same principles as hypnotherapy. It just puts them into a manual and creates a system and a step-by-step plan, which for a lot of therapists who struggle with being their authentic self and really embracing their creative potential in the therapy session is very comforting, because it's like, I don't have to think too much. I don't have to worry about whether this is perfectly right for the client or not. I'm just following my program. And so I don't particularly like EMDR because it's a little bit too rigid and structured for me. EMDR has been shown to be very effective with single event trauma. I went to Afghanistan, I'm coming back, I had a bad time. It's great for that. I had one car accident, I was fine before, I had a car accident, now I don't want to drive. EMDR is great at working through those things because it's a single event, and that single event is pretty linear, it can work through a system. Hypnotherapy is a much broader tool. It's much more adaptive, and so it's really specifically leads to working with complex trauma. So somebody has a systemic experience of trauma where they had a bad childhood experience, they had a bad dating experience, and now they're in an abusive relationship. EMDR is really going to struggle with that. Hypnotherapy does a lot better job working with that more complex scenario because it addresses on the unconscious identity level, not so much in a linear system. And so a lot of people go to EMDR for complex trauma and then come to me because it made it worse. And so that's my beef with EMDR. EMDR, I know a lot of people have it as a great tool, and I think it works great for that single event stuff. But I'm not a huge fan of it for that reason. Yeah, we could talk about it more, but I think it's in a nutshell. I'll tell you next. EMDR, yeah, what is EMDR? Great question. EMDR is eye motion desensitization and reprocessing. So what's funny, they've got all sorts of ways to do that. It's all about bilateral stimulation. So they've got like light bars that you follow with your eyes. They've got tapping on each side of you. They got buzzers. They got auditory beeps left and right. And so by connecting the two hemispheres of the brain, it can help resolve trauma, which we know to be true from Sigmund Freud and the pocket watch. EMDR is just taking hypnosis and making it into a manual. And then it's a lot of, I don't know, maybe I'm talking too much garbage about it. It's a lot of good marketing. Yeah, usually they talk while they're doing it. Yeah. So I just think hypnotherapy has been around a lot longer. Hypnotherapy has actually been around since ancient Egypt. They had sleep temples where they would use hypnosis to help heal people from emotional distress. So I just think hypnotherapy is a much more researched and well-rounded tool. But EMDR's got its place, for sure.
I'm still trying to visualize the hypnotherapist. So is that what you just walked through with us? And is it using hypnosis? I don't know if that question was clear.
I think I got it. You can tell me. I'll give a little answer, and you tell me if I get it all. Deal? Okay. What we talked through here is the theory of hypnosis. It's not the actual practice of hypnosis. The practice of hypnosis involves some pretty particular steps. Some pretty particular procedures. There's a lot of ways to apply those steps uniquely to the client and uniquely from the way that the therapist is. But conceptually, it's basically this process of working somebody through a trauma. There's a few key steps. You want to gather somebody's attention. This is how hypnosis works. You gather somebody's attention, right? And step one, fixation. With Freud, that was the pocket watch. I'm fixated on the pocket watch, or the spinning thing, right? I'm fixated. Focused attention. With that focused attention, second step is depotentiation. I'm taking away the possibility for distraction, right? I've got tension, and now I'm really deepening that attention. Depotentiation, and then we get into a trance, right? When I'm really inside of myself, I'm taking away the potential for distraction. I'm getting someone inside themselves, very introspective. Once I have somebody inside themselves, then I'm going to start giving suggestions. And I'm going to give those suggestions in an unconscious way. Maybe a story, or maybe a suggestion that's kind of like vague and fuzzy, but I know what the unconscious mind is going to pick up from this, but it's going to be confusing to the conscious mind. So consciously they're not going to understand it, but subconsciously they'll get it. Suggestion. Then you have post-hypnotic suggestion. This is my suggestion for how they're going to be different when they come out of the trance. And then you've got, termination of the trance. You bring them back out of that hypnotic state. Now, if we think about this can sound really confusing, but we all do this all the time, every day. Let's talk about movies, right? The movie opens, you've got the credits, the lights are dark, I'm gaining attention, right? And then the movie, something crazy happens, right? It's like, what? And so now I'm eliminating potential for distraction. I don't want to think about what else is going on. I am in the movie. Now, the movie's going to have a story that's going to have suggestions about, like, you can be the hero. You can be like Tom Cruise. No, I can't. It's okay. Post-hypnotic suggestion. I watch Fast and Furious. Now I think I can drive a car like that. No, I can't. And then the movie ends and the credits roll. We come out. So you can see we do this all the time, and movies are a great example of this. Fixation, depotentiation, suggestion, post-hypnotic suggestion, out. Now, we do that as therapists for therapy, but we also do it in movies. And so proof of this is, you ever had your soda and popcorn in the movie, and then you get 3/4 of the way through the movie and you realize you really got to go to the bathroom? Well, you know that was building all through the movie, but you were so engrossed and hypnotized by the movie that you didn't realize it until that feeling of pressure brought you out. And so it's like you can see how it hypnotizes you. Yeah.
You eat all the popcorn and then you hit the bottom of the
You're like, did I just eat that whole bucket? I ate a whole bucket of popcorn. Oh, no.
Jesse, are you saying that?
Thank you.
So, Jesse, are you saying that as a hypnotist or hypnosis therapist, you're not using a watch per se?
Not per se. I have.
I don't know if any of you understand what I'm struggling with is, are you putting someone under?
Yes.
Into a trance and then talking to them?
Yes.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. It's just like, it seemed like you were just going all around in circles and talking about the steps. And so, okay, that's all I wanted to know. Those examples were really good.
Okay, good.
But the movie is not putting somebody under per se, like a hypnotist.
Well, there's different ways. I guess what I'm saying is there's different ways to do it. It is. It's a more subtle way. I've done hypnosis through art therapy. I've done hypnosis through watching movies with my clients. I've done hypnosis through playing video games with my clients. I've done hypnosis very formally where they lay back on the couch, I say some magic words, and they drift off into themselves. So I've done it. There's many ways.
I think my problem is I'm being too narrow-minded.
Is there black and white thinking? No, it's good. It's a great question. I like it. No, I think
don't mind it in as far as the hypnotic.
sure.
And I'm getting caught up with that. But when you say, yeah, you can use art, you can use a lot of other means, I just see that different than maybe y'all.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
It's a question I get asked all the time, so it's not a strange question. What you are referring to is what we call formal trance. I do use formal trance quite a bit, but I also use informal trance all the time. So yes, I do that, but it's not, and that's where my kind of criticism of EMDR comes. EMDR is, are we doing EMDR or are we not doing EMDR? Me being trained as a hypnotherapist, even the way I gave a presentation today, I'm monitoring my tone, I'm monitoring the speed at which I deliver words to engage you in, make you think deeper, pull you in with a new concept. And so we're doing, yeah, that's a good speaker, is hypnotic, absolutely. So that's all I'm trying to say, yeah.
I was just wondering if you could give us an example of what kind of things would you maybe say to somebody when you're getting them into the trance?
Getting them into the trance?
Clear, right? Just to make sure and be sure, we within our work of helping, I am in no way saying that we are going to be or suggesting that we should be hypnotizing our The question that I'm following are out of curiosity.
might need to say that on the mic.
Are out of curiosity for Jesse's profession.
It'd be good for you to say that on your mic.
Sure, sure.
I'm serious.
No,
If
but
you're
I
gonna
will
be
hold
sending this out,
I'm just the people that attended here today, right? So, and I really want to be clear on that. There are some practices and some suggestions and some tools that Jesse gave us and how we can really help our participants as we're working with them. Leading with curiosity, how to stay clear of confrontation bumps, right? How to engage authentically with participants, right? That's the takeaway, right? Jesse does amazing work on the outside with other things. So I just want to be clear. No one here is being signed up to be a therapist or a hypnotist. We are gleaning from Jesse's profession on how to engage our participants, how to be curious and lead with curiosity, how to make sure we're taking care of ourselves in the process, and being aware of personality, neurodivergence, and how that plays a role when we're working with participants, right? And so we should always be reaching out to our professionals who manage and work with mental health and do that to really go that level, right? So it's just how to be aware and how to refer.
They need that, we can refer them.
Yeah,
Exactly. And so my goal is as a licensed, both on the state level and national level, as an educator and a teacher for hypnosis, a professional doing this, I'm giving you all insight to the unconscious suggestions and the implicit reality that you may be confronting or even giving to those people you work with without even knowing it. So this is about education. I'm not certifying anyone to be a hypnotherapist or hypnosis, but it's like, hey, these are some things, because this is my full-time job to pay attention to what I'm saying without saying it. I'm giving you some data. That's all. That's all. Yeah. I'm going to go here, and then I saw you, so you're next.
Cool. So I have a couple questions not related to hypnosis. Do you probably do you use animal therapy or pet therapy within your work? And how does that reflect with youth and young adults, at least probably within your most recent experience?
Yeah. So I haven't personally used animals in my therapy, but one of my therapists, Brittany, has a fully trained and certified therapy dog, Honey, who's on my website. You can go see a cute little video of her playing in the fields. It's cute. But it's very effective. It's very effective in all ways, because what it's doing is it's getting someone back connected with their body. The dog is actually trained to, if somebody's anxious, it puts pressure on their lap or on their chest to kind of calm them down, to ground them. And then through the dog's breathing, through the hearing of them panting, through the feeling of that dog's heartbeat on their chest, it starts to co-regulate and help them reduce those emotional behavioral symptoms, so that way we can start the therapy process. Because again, if somebody's in fight or flight mode, we can't even start therapy. So the dog is a huge tool for that, especially someone who may be typically resistant to therapy or maybe doesn't have the cognitive ability to listen to my suggestions for, let's do a deep breathing exercise. That may be too cerebral. So yeah, great. Follow-up question.
Try to hold off the hypnosis questions.
I'll just give it.
So my follow-up question to that is for probably some of your clients who go in for like to work with any. Do you see or have you seen a need for them to get their own service animal? And then if so, like what would be that process like for that? Because I know a lot of youth and young adults, when they get an animal, especially if they are unhoused, that provides them comfort. And so when they get housed, we have issues with pet fees and things like that. And therefore they end up like going through the emotional detachment cycle when they have to give up their pet. So how have you seen that within your work?
Yeah. No. When somebody uses or participates in animal-assisted therapy, it doesn't create a need for them to get their own pet. It's just a helpful tool. Like, maybe I've got a sand tray, for play therapy in my office. It doesn't mean that every client who does sand tray needs a sand tray at their home now. And honestly, like, emotional support animals are super pop culture and in vogue right now, and I think they're way overutilized. A lot of my clients will ask me for letters for their apartment complex, and I'm very specific in those letters. I say, hey, sure, an animal would help them with their emotional health. Probably help them co-regulate, probably help them calm down, but I'm not certifying whatever weird little yappy dog they've got. Like, you need a trained animal. Like, honey is very expensive. Honey's liability insurance is more expensive than my liability insurance. Honey's training, they're very expensive. And, the training that Honey goes through is incredible. Like, it's very rigorous. And a lot of people who are saying, like, hey, will you certify my parrot as an emotional support animal? No, I will not. I will say that you would benefit from an emotional support animal, but I don't think it makes sense for your living situation or for the amount of money it costs to get one, right? So I'll give you a letter saying, yeah, sure, of course, I think just about anybody would benefit from a fully trained animal, but I'm not certifying your little, whatever. Get it? All right.
I see that a common thread of some of the information that you presented is helping an individual to come into themselves and to become introspective. And I really liked what you shared about confrontation and that we want to help someone to kind of wrestle with things within themselves and come to their own conclusions and empower them in that way. Are there other tips and ideas that you think would be helpful in helping someone to get to that place of introspection? I think what you talked about, asking open-ended questions and playing dumb and acting confused, that's helpful. And are there any other tips that you think would be helpful in that as we work with our youth and young adults?
Sure. That's great. Yeah, that's really great. I definitely would say that curiosity and open questions and really being curious about them is number one. I think from there, it's really using what the client gives you, right? So if they're really interested in something, I want to know what their kind of connection with that thing is, right? Whatever they give me is great. I was having an amazing conversation with somebody at a drop-in center, and they were telling me all about they came to this earth before the sun was here. And I was like, that's amazing. I was like, I came to this earth in an egg before the sun was here, and then I hatched, and I'm an immortal being. I was like, that's awesome. I was like, that sounds like a lot of responsibility, though. And I was like, if I was an immortal being, I would feel like, do you feel like that? And they're like, it's a lot of work. And I was like, interesting. So I'm not confronting, but I'm just like, what is this story telling me? I'm not going to argue with them whether they're an immortal being or not. I mean, they're God, so how am I to argue? But what I am going to say is like, what is this telling me, right? It's like, I'm gonna ask some questions that get to the core of like what their emotions are kind of doing, what they think about. And so for this individual, it was a lot of this responsibility. And so instead of focusing, what I found out is instead of focusing on themselves and their improvement, like practically, they were thinking about, I've got to fix the whole world. And I'm like, okay, I can see where you're getting tripped up now. I don't have to confront like your religious views or like your views about, your past life regression or whatever it is. But it's like, but I can see by asking some of these questions what it is that's kind of holding you back. So I'm just looking for sort of systems of thinking, really is what it is. And the open questions and the being curious and the listening to what they give me, like whatever it is they're saying is telling me an underlying story. So that's really what I'm looking for, if that helps. But I think you can really do that through the open question stuff. Yeah.
If I may, because I'm I'm looking at the time. I want to
Yeah, we gotta go.
out, and I welcome you to hang around for a little bit.
sure.
And if Jesse's open to sticking around, feel free to chat in with him. But I want to thank everybody for coming today. We really appreciate it. Again, you're going to get emails probably from Jackie Eber. They should be coming to your managers or directors. We do want you guys to start and continue your training, Homelessness Response System 101, HMIS system, and also if you're a system guide or a drop-in center, you need to do access and intake. So please make sure that you're doing those trainings because we have some projects that are coming up that we need to make sure that you're trained to be able to do those projects. And as I said, our hope to launch everything and bring everything on board will be March. So we want to make sure that we have you guys ready and in place for that. Please mark your calendars for February 9th. February 9th will be the ribbon cutting. That's your birthday? That's my boy's birthday. Oh, yay! Special day. It's Jesse's son's birthday. And then also Salt will be doing the ribbon cutting for their new shower vehicle, which is really going to be an essential part of our youth drop-in center. It'll be right here in one of our parking lots. So we'll send out more information, but please mark that in your calendar.
Okay, February 9th is a good day.
February 9th is a good day.
What are you doing?
Yes, but I love you all. And again, I thank you for showing up, and we look forward to continue to working with you. And we're here for more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. For all those who want to go, why don't we go ahead and dismiss if you want to go? And if anyone's got questions, you can kind of come on up, and we'll answer those here. Come on over.